Chapter 795. Because this was a house left by his parents, one of the 2 bedrooms had always been empty. Although there was a ready-made bed, it was usually used to store sundries. At this time, it was no problem to tidy up the room. So he got up and said to Kardashian, who couldn't walk anymore, "I'm going to tidy up the bed. You can sleep in this room tonight." "That, sister, what do you think?" "I'll listen to you." Kardashian looked at the screen on the wall without turning her head. Roddy didn't know why this sister was pestering him like this. He could only bite the bullet and said, "By the way, don't forget to pick some underwear later." "That, I don't think you brought a change of clothes." Kardashian turned her head and looked at him with a faint smile. Roddy, whose face was already red, ran away and went to tidy up silently. She felt an inexplicable sense of superiority when Roddy ran away, and the corners of her mouth couldn't help curling up. Turning her eyes, Kardashian tried to click on the underwear column for a long time, but she clicked on the sexy underwear sub-option. The underwear that appeared on the screen suddenly made Kardashian stunned. After clicking on the preview, she saw herself wearing a few small pieces of cloth on the screen. Kardashian felt that her face must be even redder than Roddy's just now. This pervert. Kardashian didn't know Chinese, nor did she understand the customs of this world. She instinctively thought that this was the normal underwear. After all, she didn't want to wear other clothes naked, so she looked around guiltily. After confirming that Roddy didn't come over, she hurriedly picked a few clothes and threw them into the shopping cart. She didn't know how to order and pay. Anyway, Roddy said that she only needed to throw things into the shopping cart. Roddy came over to pay for Kardashian after he was done packing. In order to avoid suspicion, he didn't look through it. He directly clicked on the payment button, which made him seem rather generous. As an otaku, he actually didn't spend much over the years. Including his parents' inheritance, he had about 800,000 yuan in his bank account. Although Kardashian didn't choose high-end luxury items, the 70 to 80 items still cost Roddy about 30,000 yuan. If it was to buy a bunch of clothes for himself, he wouldn't be willing to spend so much money. However, beautiful women were born with immunity, and he had an inexplicable trust in Kardashian, so he didn't feel that it was unreasonable to spend so much money. As for the little scheme in the heart of an otaku, Roddy naturally would not admit it. He was neither gay nor frigid. After all, he was a normal young man. Although he kept repeating in his heart that he was like this to pursue his memory, the faint fragrance in the air always made him a little distracted. After closing the Taobao interface, Roddy brought Kardashian to the sink. He took out a new electric toothbrush and taught her how to brush her teeth and wash her face. He also taught her how to use the shower head. The hot water that came out made the latter exclaim, "You can do this without magic circles?" Roddy's eyebrows twitched. He was more and more convinced that he had encountered a strange thing that only happened in novels. She might really have traveled from the game to the real world. The dragon horns and vertical pupils made him roughly sure that she was the dragons in Earthbreaker. But why did she ask him to call her sister? Roddy's mind was in a mess. He saw Kardashian make a face at the mirror while brushing her teeth with foam. He couldn't help but twitch his eyebrows. Don't swallow the foam. You need to spit it out. It's so fun. Kardashian was like a child, as if she didn't hear what he said at all. There was also a screen on the mirror of the sink. It was scrolling through the weather and news. Kardashian's left hand was wrapped in bandages. At this time, she was using her right hand to move back and forth. Although she couldn't understand what was written, this method was novel to her and she couldn't stop. There was no change of clothes today, so she didn't take a bath. After a simple wash, Kardashian entered the bedroom. She didn't want to sleep at all, so she asked, "What do you usually do at night?" "Play games." "What game?" "Earthbreaker." Roddy felt a little confused. Because the person in front of him was a character in the game, he felt a strong sense of dissonance when he said it. Kardashian didn't feel it at all. She narrowed her eyes and said, I also want to play. Can you let me try? Gulp. Roddy swallowed and didn't know how to answer for a moment. As Roddy and Kardashian began to live together in the city, the atmosphere in Elson City could be said to be extremely lively. The scheduled cabinet meeting did not take place because of Roddy's absence, but the attending nobles still reported to Duke and Sally on the various current developments in the territory. Overall, they were happy and worried, but more happy than worried. The pressure from the orcs, the undead, and the royal family forced all the forces in EFTA to stand on the same side. But when the external contradictions disappeared, whether the internal stability could be maintained was another matter. Sally could see this, but there was nothing she could do at the moment. Roddy's disappearance was tantamount to EFTA's biggest spine being pulled out. It really made people feel helpless. After the attending cabinet members left, Sally still stayed in Elson City. She and Akasha put aside their old prejudices and put in all their effort in search and rescue for Roddy. But every day when they came to the top of the magic tower, they could only look at each other and sigh with guardian Camilla. They could see Camilla's guilt, but no matter how much they comforted her, it was of no use. Looking at her thin and haggard appearance, no one felt very comfortable, and their only hope could only be placed on the illusion of Grand Arcanist Edith. Edith's condition had not been very stable after he helped Camilla to leave the sphere of confinement. However, with the replenishment of a large number of recharged crystals in the past 2 days, Edith, whose energy had been restored, finally invited Camilla and several core members of Elson City to visit the Helchino Magic Tower. But in the end, only Akasha, Sally, and Camilla entered the Magic Tower. There was no doubt about EFTA's identity as Duke, and Akasha entered with the title of Roddy's woman. But no one knew that, including Camilla, these three actually had an inseparable relationship with Roddy. Before entering the Magic Tower, Camilla had already popularized the concept of Grand Arcanist to the other two. So Sally and Akasha responded according to the specifications of the visit to Lassiman. The grand appearance and the ceremonial procession before entering the tower was not small. This was mainly to show the mages participating in the conference. After all, if such a powerful magic tower and its master could join EFTA, it would basically set the tone for Elson City as the capital of magic in the country. They had already prepared themselves, but after seeing the illusion of Edith, that amazing aura and beauty still gave Sally, who thought of herself as a powerful person, a great shock. But this kind of beauty was not breathtaking, but the calmness of profound knowledge and confidence. In front of her, the three were no different from little girls in front of their elders. But Edith did not use her power to oppress them. Instead, she calmly talked about the only topic that interested them: how to rescue Roddy. The coordinates of the space-time prison are difficult to find, but it does not mean that it is completely impossible. Now that my energy has recovered, I can let the magic tower replace me to search the plane. But it will take a long time, and there is a possibility that it will be fruitless. Edith stood in the core room on the top floor and explained her plan to the three women in front of her. As an explanation, she used the surrounding crystal walls to show the different scenes of different planes. The scenes of ice and snow, volcanic eruptions, tropical rainforests, and even the pure darkness of the underground city really dazzled the three women. At the same time, they had a general understanding of the difficulty of the search and rescue at the moment. If we are lucky and find the plane where Roddy is, I can't enter it by myself. The magic tower can only help me by exerting some influence on him from the side. The rest is up to him. Everything will be based on the plan of His Excellency, the Grand Arcanist. The three of them looked at each other. Their level of magic was 200 streets away from this person in front of them, and they could not even be considered amateurs. Therefore, after discussing in a low voice, they did not make any additional requests. After all, this matter was too dangerous. If they insisted on playing any other tricks, they probably would not even have the hope of rescue. With the plan in place, everyone's uneasy mood was slightly better. But Edith suddenly asked, "The dragons who are trapped in the space-time prison with Roddy, do you know her identity?" This made the three women look at each other. They were worried about Roddy, but they had long forgotten about Kardashian. Ah, she is the daughter of the Lord of the Frost Dragon race. What about Lord Victor? Lord Victor was in the outer forest dealing with the space-time crack. If he returned to Elson at this time and found that his daughter was inexplicably missing, it would be troublesome. What if the Lord tore down Elson City because of a disagreement? In the whole of Elson City, the only one who could talk to the dragons was Roddy. For characters like Akasha and Sally, it was estimated that Victor would only maintain the most basic politeness. This made them feel bad, but there was really no other way. In the end, Sally gave the most common trick that noble lords used to deal with their superiors. "Then, His Excellency the Grand Arcanist, please hide the magic tower temporarily. If Lord Victor asks, we will just say that he and Roddy have not returned yet, and we do not know anything else." At present, this was the only way. Edith nodded and did not say much. She just had some speculations in her heart, but it was useless to tell them in front of her. After the tower quieted down, the Grand Arcanist stood in the center of the core room, looking at the crystal wall in front of her, and sighed in a low voice. Chapter 796. While the Grand Arcanist was having a headache searching for Roddy, Roddy was also frustrated by his memory that was riddled with holes. He looked up at the clock in his bedroom. It was already 4 o'clock in the morning, and he was feeling a little dizzy after staying up all night. However, what made him even more dizzy was the information that he found overnight. The name, Kardashian, had many names in Earthbreaker, but there was only one dragon's. However, because it was a dragon's, normal players had no way of getting in touch with it. The only information that he could find was, daughter of the Lord of the Frost Dragon race, Victor. The daughter of the Lord of the Frost Dragon was a very scary identity. But why would she appear in front of him, alive and well? Victor, Roddy had never seen this Lord of the Dragons before, but the image of a man in a blue robe suddenly appeared in his mind. It seemed that the man had signed something with him. The fuzzy memory seemed to have loosened, but no matter how hard Roddy tried to recall, it seemed to have stopped there. He turned to other information, but after reading the current battle report of Earthbreaker for a long time, he no longer had the same feeling, so he gave up. Last night, Kardashian made a fuss about playing Earthbreaker, but this new machine could not allow others to log in to play on behalf of others. Registering a new account required an ID and photo verification. Although there were ways to avoid this, there was no time to waste at night, so he gave up. After that, Kardashian took the Earthbreaker dungeon guide and looked at the illustrations for a while before going to bed. Roddy could not figure out what she was thinking. Looking at the helmet beside the virtual cockpit, Roddy was not in the mood to go online and do those daily quests. His life was disrupted by a beauty from another world, and he still felt like it was a dream. Perhaps when he woke up tomorrow, he would realize that it was really a dream. Roddy lay on the bed, exhausted. He raised his hand and glanced at the Weibo on the AR screen. He found that his Weibo had suddenly increased by more than 10,000 posts, 120,000 followers, and more than 3,000 comments. He was shocked. His most forwarded Weibo posts in the past were no more than 1,000. He had done nothing for the past 2 days. What was going on? After browsing for a long time, he found that many of them were scolding him. The reason was very simple. Yesterday's live broadcast directly became the top news on Weibo, and later became the #1 hot topic. Because Roddy showed his face, he was also dug out by some people. In this day and age, privacy was almost impossible to hide from the internet, so a large number of people came over in the name of wanted Roddy, scolding him, an otaku, for stealing the goddess and so on. Of course, most of the people here were just joking around. Only a few of them were jealous and cursing. Roddy's mental endurance was strong, so he directly skipped over it. He forced himself to search through these messages for a long time, and finally confirmed a fact. Although many people tried to find out the origin of Kardashian, except for the far-fetched photos of a few European and American stars, there was no real evidence at all. In other words, Kardashian appeared out of thin air, and there was no trace of her origin. "Damn it, what's going on?" The extremely sleepy Roddy kept repeating the Sichuan dormitory mate's catchphrase, and decided to think about it tomorrow. He closed his eyes and fell asleep, but not long after he fell asleep, he was awakened by a strange feeling of suffocation. Suddenly opening his eyes, Roddy found that his nose was actually being pinched by a white hand. Lack of sleep and still in a daze, Roddy, who had lived alone for a long time, had completely forgotten that there was a beauty living in his house, so his first reaction was seeing a ghost. He screamed in fright and his face turned pale. As a result, his hand was empty, and he fell off the bed with a bang and fell on his back. Kardashian was not as energetic as before, but she slept less than a normal person. When she woke up at 6 in the morning, she found that Roddy was not up, so she broke into the master bedroom without saying anything. Seeing him sleeping soundly and defenseless, the young lady suddenly became playful. Pinching her nose and pressing her mouth, she forcibly woke up Roddy. Roddy's horrified expression made her laugh, but when she saw him fall off the bed, Kardashian realized that she seemed to have gone a little too far. Everyone's character was largely shaped by memory. Kardashian suddenly thought of a serious problem. The other party had already forgotten who Kardashian was. Now that he was teased like this, would he hate her? As soon as this thought came to her, Kardashian immediately ran over and helped him up in a panic. She didn't even realize what it meant. Thanks to the carpet beside the bed, Roddy did not have a concussion when he hit the back of his head on the ground. But it was inevitable that he was seeing stars. He looked at the person in front of him in a daze, and after confirming that it was not a ghost who came to help him, he slowly came to his senses. After being teased like this, he really wanted to lose his temper, but the beauty in front of him was frighteningly beautiful, and Kardashian looked apologetic. The angry words were on the tip of his tongue, but he didn't say it in the end. After a few seconds, he said helplessly, "Don't do this next time." "Is it serious?" "I'm really sorry." When she said this, Kardashian was stunned. She seemed to have never said sorry to anyone in her life, not even to her father, Victor. "It's okay, just let me rest." Roddy covered the back of his head as he got up. To be honest, it was nothing serious. However, the fright had made him wide awake. He turned to look at his watch and found that it was only 6:10 in the morning. He had only slept for 2 hours. He wanted to say that he would sleep a little more, but when he saw Kardashian dressed neatly and looked energetic, he swallowed the words and rubbed the dark circles under his eyes. "Are you hungry? I'm going to make breakfast." Okay. Kardashian felt that everything was fresh, and even watching Roddy frying eggs in the kitchen was very interesting. She pressed the microwave, tasted the seasonings in the seasoning box one by one, and put her head under the hood of the range hood to observe, but when she turned her head, the dragon horn almost took off the hood. Roddy felt that the beauty beside him was almost like a kindergarten child, just like a spring that could not be stopped. When breakfast was ready and the projection was turned on, she obediently sat back at the table and wolfed down the bread and eggs. The projection broadcasted the news, and Kardashian watched it while smearing a thick layer of condensed milk on her bread. "This thing is really delicious." She licked the condensed milk on the bread and sighed, which made Roddy rub his temples. Were all dragons like this? There was nothing new in the news on the projection, so Roddy flipped through it and switched to the Earthbreaker channel. When he saw the latest news about the orc invasion, Kardashian glanced at the map on the image, thought for a moment, and said, "The orcs are attacking very fiercely. I see that the entire Ifta region has fallen?" Roddy frowned. He felt that there were a few keywords in this sentence, and he vaguely remembered something, but he replied, "Yes, the front line is difficult to maintain. I'm not very familiar with this area, but I think there's a place called Norland Village?" Kardashian was weighing her words. She did not dare to say, "You are the scout of Norland Village," directly, but wanted to see if these keywords could help him remember. Norland Village? This is commonly known as the Novice Village, but it has already. Roddy was halfway through his sentence when he suddenly frowned. Kardashian could see that his eyes were fixed on the map on the projection, and after thinking for a moment, he suddenly said, "I am a scout?" As soon as the words left his mouth, Roddy held his head in pain, and a series of images appeared. He saw an endless grassland in the rain, and the sound of raindrops echoed in his mind. That was the decision he made in the simple tent when he discussed with Sodeler how to attack the orc village. Wait, when did I bring a scout to counterattack the orcs? He sat up in shock, and his eyes turned to Kardashian, who was holding a cup of coffee. She did not speak, but looked at him with a hopeful gaze. Chapter 797. The memory came to an abrupt end after Sorota's witch-doctor died. This was completely different from the content of the Earthbreaker game. Roddy quickly opened the search bar and typed in Sorota. As expected, a series of mission introductions appeared. This witch-doctor was a slightly famous boss in the orc army. At present, he should be the second in command of the orc Rohar's Hammer. There was a high probability that he would become the chief in the future. Just a few days ago, there was a report of him leading an army. How could such an influential figure die quietly beside a pond in the Nesimian grasslands? Roddy looked up. He suddenly understood why he looked different in the mirror. He said, "What color do you think my hair is?" Kardashian did not expect Roddy to ask this. She put down the coffee cup and said, "Brown. But after your hair grows out, it won't be as fun as before when you were bald." This answer made Roddy understand. When other people looked at him, they saw him as the otaku Roddy. But in Kardashian's eyes, it was the same as the image he saw in the mirror. In other words, he and Kardashian were the same kind of person. The sudden awakening of a part of his memory made Roddy's face look more determined. When he spoke, he was not as hesitant as before. Kardashian saw this change and knew that her hint had worked. She felt an indescribable sense of accomplishment and responsibility, thinking of how Roddy had protected her many times as an elder sister. She had an inexplicable desire to repay him. After all, if he had not blocked her in the magic tower, she would not have had to experience the pain of the third time and space prison. Although her current life was not painful at all, Kardashian was still determined in her heart. She must restore him to normal and leave this place safely. Combined with the images and the keywords, Kardashian's mind immediately became active. She glanced at the constantly flipping advertisement page on the projection and had a rough idea of the next step of her plan. She said, "Can you take me out for a walk in the morning? This place feels so big." Lin Sanjiu actually wanted to see the scope of this space-time prison. If she could find the boundary, she could bring Roddy there to have a look. He would probably understand what it meant. Roddy agreed. He didn't have to work, and he had a lot of doubts in his mind. He couldn't figure out what to do even if he just sat at home, so he might as well go out and relax. However, Kardashian would be too eye-catching if she went out in a magic robe. Roddy suggested that they wait until the clothes arrived. Because of his vague memories and intuition, Roddy felt that he was very familiar with this sister. The other party's relaxed behavior also proved this point. However, under such circumstances, he ignored the impact of Kardashian's figure and appearance. He knew that these dragons were beautiful, but he obviously didn't realize that excessive beauty often meant trouble in a materialistic society. It was not even 7 o'clock when they finished eating. At this time, the speed of logistics was very fast. 10 years ago, express delivery took 1 or 2 days to arrive, but now it was half the time. He glanced at the goods tracking. The things he bought last night would basically arrive today, but the express delivery was usually around 10 o'clock in the morning. Kardashian saw Roddy's dark circles and couldn't stop yawning. She felt a little guilty and whispered to him to go to bed and rest. The latter was indeed sleepy. He didn't ask much and went back to his bedroom to sleep. He didn't know that this dragons in front of him had never been so considerate to his father. Kardashian was not sleepy at all, but she couldn't stay idle either. She originally couldn't understand the books on the bookshelf in the living room. Instead, she saw a large tome with the words Bringen/Chinese dictionary written on it. She thought for a moment, then took it out and flipped through it. Not long after, she got up and glanced at the bookshelf. She also took a Chinese dictionary to the side and flipped through the two dictionaries at the same time. Today, the northern wind was strong 3 or 4. The fog in the capital was gone overnight. Outside the window, there were blue skies and white clouds, and the sun shone into the room. Kardashian was bathed in the light. The white bandage was dazzling under the sunlight. After flipping through more than half of the dictionaries in front of her, she couldn't help but recall the scene of Roddy bandaging her yesterday. Unknowingly, her mind wandered. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Kardashian didn't wait for Roddy to wake up and open the door herself. The delivery man was startled. He stuttered when he said, "Please sign for receipt." After more than 20 packages were moved into the house, Kardashian glanced at the list on the package. She picked up the scissors she used to cut the bandage yesterday and began to open it. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Roddy was awakened by the smell of food. When he opened the door of the master bedroom, he was startled. In front of him, Kardashian was wearing pink home clothes and standing by the stove, heating food. This kind of cute pajamas was a simple long shirt and trousers, but it was painted with cartoon cat patterns. At the same time, there was a hood with cat ears. Even when she took off her shoes, they were in the shape of pink cat paws. Obviously, it was a set. Kardashian was about 1.78 meters tall, not counting the dragon horns. She was full of breasts, cleavage, long legs, and peerless beauty. In addition, she casually tied her hair in a ponytail. At this moment, she was like a beautiful girl who broke the fourth wall. Even if she didn't wear any makeup, she could casually take a few photos with her phone and upload them to the internet. "You're awake? I've heated up the leftovers from last night. Come and eat." Roddy gulped. He had no idea what was going on. How did Kardashian, who was curious about everything in the morning, suddenly become like this? "Sister, you know how to use a microwave?" There was no word for microwave in Bulinga, so Roddy could only come up with one. Kardashian answered readily, "It's not difficult to use. There's an instruction manual in the small drawer at the side. I've followed the instructions in the book." But he glanced at the two dictionaries in the living room and was stunned. He had to admit that the ridiculous idea in his heart was probably true. So in the end, Roddy obediently sat at the dining table, picked up the chopsticks and started eating. As he ate, he suddenly felt a little sore in his eyes. He lowered his head and tried hard not to be noticed by Kardashian. This was also the first time Kardashian cooked for someone. Although it was just heating up the food, there was a strange sense of satisfaction in her heart. It had always been Roddy who waited on her. In order to make him return to normal, she would condescend to take care of him for a while. As she thought of this in her heart, she suddenly noticed Roddy's strange behavior. She asked, "What's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" "I just suddenly remembered. It's been 4 years since someone asked me to sit here and eat." Roddy suppressed his emotions. He couldn't tell which was real, reality or memory. But at this moment, he was much better than his introverted and timid self last night. At least now he dared to raise his head and look at Kardashian's home clothes seriously. "The clothes here are very comfortable. They're soft and elastic." Being stared at by Roddy, Kardashian wasn't angry. Instead, she excitedly talked about the clothes that had just arrived. Clearly, no matter which dimension, a woman's passion for clothes would never change. After the leftovers were cleaned up, Roddy got up to wash the dishes. Meanwhile, Kardashian ran to her own bedroom, saying that she wanted to show Roddy the clothes she had picked out. "I guess I really saved the galaxy in my previous life." Roddy, who was standing in the kitchen, silently sighed. He turned his head and saw Kardashian walking out of the bedroom in a camisole and hot pants. He complained, "It's just that this bandage is too eye-catching. This kind of clothes doesn't seem to be made of much fabric, but it looks very refreshing." Not to mention her long legs that were 178 meters tall, her perky twin peaks were unknown to him. Looking at them made Roddy's mouth dry. After trying his best to drink a cup of cold water, he replied, "Sis, this is for summer wear. It's not warm outside now. It'll be cold if we go out. And if we want to go out, I think we should cover the horns on top of our heads. Otherwise, it'll be troublesome if we're surrounded by people." Hearing this, Kardashian was a little discouraged. "That's true. But I specially bought one." After saying that, she strode back to the bedroom and continued to change. Chapter 798. Roddy felt that he had enjoyed all the eye candy he could ever have in his life. However, Kardashian had only bought 3 or 4 sets of clothes, all of which were standard styles. As for the maid outfits that otakus liked, there was no need to think about it. This thought flashed through Roddy's mind. He laughed at himself, feeling that he was thinking too much. After he finished packing, he sat on the sofa in the living room. Bored from waiting, he turned on his watch and scrolled through Weibo. He found that he had received more than 30,000 messages, all of which were related to Kardashian. Roddy filtered the content to original. Most of the messages were comments from famous cozers, as well as the follow-up comments from yesterday's live streamer, Never Shagging PY Moon. Other than that, there was also a famous paparazzi account. Roddy remembered that these famous accounts in the entertainment industry were always exposing secrets of celebrities. As long as there was no international news, they would be on the hot topics. Paparazzi was a very annoying profession. With the development of technology over the years, paparazzi's behavior had become more and more unscrupulous. However, Roddy felt that he and Kardashian weren't big celebrities. He guessed that these guys were just trying to be popular, so he didn't pay much attention to them and scrolled over. After that, he saw a comment from Earthbreaker's official Weibo. "Frost Dragon Race Kardashian has arrived at Zongwankan. Those who want to raid her, please consider the wrath of Lord Victor in advance." This message made him frown. The name Kardashian wasn't something that could be found easily. There were so many dragons, and there were many female members. How could the other party be so sure that it was Kardashian? He couldn't figure it out, so he opened the private message and saw that there were already dozens of messages from companies asking about endorsements. The rest were inexplicable insults or advertisements. Roddy wasn't interested in replying to these messages. He turned his head and looked at the gaming cabin in the living room. In the past, he would feel uncomfortable if he didn't log in for a day, but now, he was looking forward to going shopping with Kardashian. What's going on? Am I trying to break away from the ranks of otakus? Roddy recalled the memory of the Nolan Village scout in the morning. That kind of real killing was far more exciting than the game. With that memory, Roddy naturally did not want to waste his time in the game world like he did in the past. While he was lost in thought, Kardashian pushed open the bedroom door and appeared in front of Roddy in a very ordinary casual outfit. A hoodie with a butterfly pattern was paired with a pair of skinny jeans. The style was simple, inexpensive, and unremarkable. However, as a dragon's, Kardashian's aura was astonishing. She wore a plain casual outfit with an aura of luxury. After all, this kind of self-confidence that was accumulated through one's own strength was far from what the socialites of influential families in normal society could compare to. Most importantly, there were 2 cartoon-style cat ears on the hood of the outfit. Because it was hollow after pulling it up, the dragon horns on Kardashian's head could support it, and it didn't look out of place. She wanted to wear high heels, but in the end, under Roddy's suggestion, she changed into a new white 3-leaf grass shoe. The youthful aura coming from the shoes made Roddy feel dizzy. "Is this okay?" Kardashian ran to the mirror in the hall and looked around. She put her hands in her pockets and raised her slightly pointed chin at Roddy. What else could the latter say other than nodding? It was indeed appropriate to describe her as a national calamity. Today was the weekend. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the new Zhongguan shopping mall was very lively. Naturally, Kardashian, who went shopping with Roddy, was not as conspicuous as yesterday. However, to be safe, Roddy still bought a pair of Burberry sunglasses for her in the eyewear shop on the first floor. Although 3,000 yuan was not cheap, the rune-like patterns on the golden frame really matched Kardashian's temperament. In the past, Roddy might have hesitated to pay for it, but after recovering some of his memory in the morning, he became much more generous and paid the bill without hesitation. Kardashian's learning ability was abnormal. Although she could not speak Chinese, she basically had no difficulty in reading. After a casual stroll in the mall, she roughly knew the current price level of this world, so she also understood how much purchasing power 3,000 yuan had. This guy, I didn't take care of him in vain. Since putting on the sunglasses, Kardashian was in an extremely happy mood. Her emotions were so obvious that even Roddy looked at her strangely. However, because of the sunglasses, he did not see Kardashian's eyes narrowed because of joy. There were many kinds of big shopping malls. Naturally, Roddy had skipped the women's area before, but today, he accompanied Kardashian to visit many clothing stores with great interest. They had bought a lot of clothes, but women could not resist the desire to shop. Roddy bought 2 pairs of shoes and a silk scarf, and then accidentally walked into the Sephora store that sold cosmetics. Kardashian's skin and face were perfect, comparable to the effect of Photoshop filters. Foundation and BB cream were completely unnecessary. She looked at the pile of bottles and jars. She also felt that it was very troublesome to apply these things on her face, but after the shop assistant begged her to use a Dior lipstick, Roddy had to admit that red lips were really the finishing touch to Kardashian's appearance. She took off her sunglasses and looked left and right in the mirror on the counter. Then, she became playful and imitated the celebrity advertisement on the big screen next to her. She blew a kiss and bit her lips at Roddy, which made the latter look away with his mouth twitching. He felt that his blood pressure was a little high. However, the shop assistant who originally recommended the lipstick was stunned by Kardashian's appearance. At this time, she was staring at her. She only reacted after Roddy asked her to swipe the card several times. When it was time for dinner, Roddy took her to Haidaleo on the top floor to eat hot pot. Kardashian, who had never seen such a way of eating, was naturally very curious. As a result, after eating the hot pot, she was in tears because of the spiciness, but she kept eating as if she was addicted. Roddy asked for yogurt to help her relieve the spiciness. Kardashian wiped her tears and tried hard to drink the yogurt. She kept kicking under the table, making Roddy grimace in pain. "You did it on purpose." "No, I really didn't. Isn't there a clear soup pot? I told you that it's spicy, but you—" Before Roddy could finish his words, Kardashian sat over and grabbed his neck. "I said you did it on purpose, so you did it on purpose." He knew that Kardashian's left arm was injured. He was afraid that she would affect the wound, so he hurriedly swayed left and right to cooperate. "I did it on purpose, sister, please forgive me. I was wrong." Chapter 799. Roddy's angle was right next to Kardashian's left arm, so he asked her in a low voice if there was anything wrong with the wound on her arm. The latter looked at his cautious look, and felt very comfortable. Although she felt that her arm was fine, she said, "It still hurts a little." "Then let's go home later. I'll change the dressing for you." "Okay, let's go home." Kardashian suddenly felt that there seemed to be a pun in her words, and her voice trembled slightly. But when she looked at Roddy, she found that this guy was searching for something on the screen projected by his watch. She glanced at him and found that Roddy was looking at the wound dressing guide. Is this guy's brain a little too rigid? Could it be that he really meant what he said? Kardashian naturally didn't know that Roddy really had the temperament of a lonely life at this moment. She thought for a while and felt that this guy should not mean anything else. After all, his memory has not been restored. No, even if he has recovered, so what? What am I thinking? Her thoughts were a little confused, and she even forgot the purpose of today's trip. Glancing at the pile of bags carried by Roddy, she couldn't help but secretly stick out her tongue. I said that I would help Roddy recover his memory, but in the end I only bought things for myself. But when she thought that these were all bought by Roddy for her, Kardashian couldn't help but squint her eyes with a smile. I'm in such a contradictory mood. She shook her head and suddenly realized that this was the terrible part of the time-space prison. Even an outsider like herself was almost lost in this overly realistic world, let alone Roddy. I have to find a way quickly. Thinking of this, the waiter brought the payment receipt. Roddy got up with 3 big bags and walked out of the Hadaleo with Kardashian. It was only 7:00 after dinner. For the weekend in the capital, the nightlife had just begun. As she walked down the escalator, Kardashian's eyes scanned the surroundings behind her sunglasses. Finally, she locked onto an advertisement sign on the basement floor. Don't the people here sleep at night? It's a weekend. Everyone is on vacation, so they are used to coming out for entertainment. Then why are we going back so early? At this time, the two of them took the escalator down one after the other. Kardashian naturally leaned forward and put her arm on Roddy's shoulder. She pointed into the distance and said, "I think there are a lot of fun things to do in the basement. There's even an archery hall." Roddy had a strange expression on his face. He felt that Kardashian had an ulterior motive for asking him to go to the archery hall. After all, archery was one of the few hobbies that he had cultivated in Earthbreaker. While others relied on the help of aiming in the game, he had already begun to eliminate all the help and rely on his archery skills to kill monsters. The place where he did a lot of shooting training was the Ishu Archery Club that Kardashian had pointed out. Roddy was a member here, and he would come here 3 or 4 times a week. Sister, why are you interested in archery? Because I realized that I don't know much about the entertainment here, Kardashian said confidently. I've never heard of billiards, darts, internet cafes, but I'm good at archery. If you don't believe me, let's have a competition? Roddy immediately waved his hand. I don't dare. Your arm is injured. Let's find another one. Kardashian's heart warmed, but she still insisted. Then I'll watch you shoot, okay? The bows here look so strange. I want to take a look. Roddy, who couldn't win against her, finally agreed. The two of them went to the archery hall. Because it was the weekend, there were 2 groups of people waiting in line in the resting area of the archery hall. Roddy didn't like crowded places, but seeing how excited Kardashian was, he naturally relaxed his tolerance. After all, it wasn't the time to wander around alone. He had to admit that he had a good impression of this beautiful woman who had appeared out of nowhere. However, Roddy's memories were not related to women at the moment. The girlfriends he had in school were long gone. This was the 2nd year since the launch of Earth Splitter. He did not even know Naife, let alone Sally, Akasha, Camilla, and the others from another dimension. Although he knew about Natha, the ever-expressionless wood elf, ranger instructor, didn't leave much of an impression on him. So, the otaku Roddy was basically a silly boy with low EQ. He only dared to think about a lot of things in his head, but the way he expressed them was very clumsy. Roddy, who came in with big and small bags, looked like a passerby in the eyes of others. However, Kardashian, who came in behind him, seemed to belong to another world. Even with a hood and sunglasses, she still became the focus of most people in the archery hall. With a height of almost 1.8 meters and a perfectly proportioned body, coupled with the curves outlined by her tight jeans, most people secretly thought that she was a big star who went out to play. However, after thinking for a long time, they couldn't figure out who she was. Roddy was familiar with the owner. After greeting him, he took Kardashian to the side and sat in line. Kardashian naturally couldn't sit still, so she got up and wandered around, trying to understand everything about the archery hall. Most archery halls focused on experience, because most people wanted something new. Basically, they used the 16 to 24-pound recurve bows provided by the hall. The targets used were all 10 meters. Although the distance wasn't far for newbies, it was already good enough if they could hit the target on their first try. At this point in time, Roddy hadn't become a ranger yet. He was a lazy PvE player, but in order to practice archery well, he had already become a member of the highest level in this archery hall. He had been here for more than a year, and in terms of skill, he had already moved away from the 10-meter track and entered the 18-meter track, which was the intermediate level. Using the 18-meter track required a test, and the standard was also very simple. 12 arrows in a group, 5 groups of 60 arrows, hit the target with 10 points, a total score of 600 points and 500 points. Normally, players who used the recurve bow in the archery hall could basically pass the test after practicing for a month. This was because this type of bow was a sightseeing bow that came with a sightseeing bow, which was much easier than the hunting bow. The hunting bow was judged by the naked eye, but the sightseeing bow only needed to be in place and aim the crosshair at the target with 10 points. Roddy had only obtained the qualification to use the 18-meter track 3 months ago. This was because he had been using the hunting bow since the beginning. His goal was naturally to have a better hit rate after he became a ranger in Earthbreaker. Chapter 800. Is that you? Kardashian's voice rang out. Roddy, who was sitting on the sofa in the lounge, continued to study the wound dressing guide, looked up and nodded. Yes, I took a test a few days ago and was lucky enough to get on the list. Both of them were speaking in Bulingen, which attracted more attention. But most of them were still paying attention to Kardashian. After all, the sunglasses could not hide her perfect face. Then you must be very good. Wearing a hood, she took a few steps back to Roddy's side and leaned back on the low sofa, looking as if she was lying next to Roddy. Roddy smiled helplessly. This is just the record of one shop. There are many people who have better results than me. He was not being modest, but Roddy did not hear the hidden meaning in Kardashian's words. The archery hall was not as noisy as a nightclub. Most of the sounds were the dull thuds of arrows hitting grass targets. The two of them were chatting, but no one could understand what they were talking about. But Roddy had obviously underestimated Kardashian's charm. The lounge was located next to the floor-to-ceiling glass window. Passers-by would naturally notice this stunning beauty in sunglasses. Among them were some young people who considered themselves to be privileged. Of course, the real privileged would not come to the Zongwankan shopping mall, which belonged to the commoners. Places like the World Trade Mall were more popular. But humans were social creatures, and it was impossible for them to be completely isolated from each other. Just like at this moment, Wang Onli, who was only there to eat, suddenly stopped in his tracks when he passed by the archery hall. Wang Onli was 27 years old this year. Relying on his father, who was a CEO, he was now the manager of a media company. Although his family was not bad, there was still a gap between him and the real, rich third generation and powerful. However, because of the nature of his work, He often came into contact with some powerful big bosses or the sons of big bosses. Later on, he also had the opportunity to show his face in the circle of bigwigs. Using the advantages of his own company, it was naturally not difficult for him to introduce some young models and actresses to those young masters. After a long time, he relied on his service reputation to have a wider market. To put it bluntly, Wang Onli was just a lackey who searched for targets for young masters. If he found any good resources, he would share them in his circle of friends. Those who were willing to help would naturally share some of his resources with him as a labor fee. In ancient times, this was no different from pimping. For the past few days, Wang Onli had been busy introducing wine parties to several rich young masters. Today, he was purely passing by Zhongguancun. There was a traffic jam in Beijing at this time of day, and there was an accident on the 4th Ring Road. He had been stuck on the roadside for more than 20 minutes without moving a few meters, so he simply stopped his car and went to a few fast food restaurants in the basement to eat something to fill his stomach. But he did not expect to meet a beautiful woman who could give him a score of 95 points even with sunglasses here. Suddenly, he could not move his feet. In this day and age, it was already a thing of the past to rush in and show off. Moreover, he knew his own capabilities. So, after sighing, he immediately took out the camera module in his pocket and connected it to his watch. He casually took a few pictures of the archery hall. After thinking for a while, he sent the pictures to Mr. Zhao, who was at the top of his address book. In a place like the capital, the aunties who bought vegetables in the vegetable market might all have a very powerful background. Naturally, the person who could be called Mr. Zhao was not an ordinary person. The other party was the 3rd or 4th generation of the rich and powerful that Wang Onli had come into contact with so far. Although they had only met a few times and did not have a good relationship, he remembered that the other party had a hobby of archery and also had a very high standard of pursuit of beauty. It was easy for a rich man to want a woman, but a woman who adhered to the rather have nothing than a substandard standard was a bit unique. At the same time, it also meant that Wang Onli had a chance. At this moment, when he saw Kardashian in the archery hall, Wang Onli knew this was definitely the prey of that rich man. He did not care about eating fast food. After getting a reply from the other party, he said a few more words, then walked to the Costa Coffee opposite the archery hall and sat down. He ordered 2 pastries and ate them with a latte. His eyes wandered between the message bar and the French windows of the archery hall. Usually, Wang Onli would not do this kind of stalking himself, so he did not realize that there were 2 people around him who also pretended to order a cup of coffee and play with their watches. In the archery hall, Roddy did not know that there were people watching outside. Because there was a queue in front, the bored Kardashian picked up a domestic recurve bow and asked about the aim, shock absorption, and so on. For these questions, Roddy, who had done some research, was naturally happy to answer. However, this otaku was obviously not good at chatting with girls. He made it seem like he was defending a thesis. The watch projected the 3D images of the compound bow and the English longbow. Roddy held the recurve bows in his hand and explained their history, differences, and functions one by one. If it were any other woman, they would have been labeled as unromantic or a straight man of science and technology. In the face of a goddess like Kardashian, how could he only talk about such boring and tedious knowledge? Even a sour poem is better than talking about this. Just the question of why would a bowstring be used to shoot an accurate bow? Roddy analyzed it from the perspective of mechanics and the structure of the bow itself for a long time. In short, this kind of archery is all about accuracy and abandoning everything else. That's why it can only be seen in archery competitions. It's a joke to use it in actual combat. Fortunately, he was speaking in the Bulinga language. Otherwise, the people around him would have rolled their eyes. However, although Roddy was unromantic, Kardashian did not show any signs of impatience. On the contrary, her questions on mechanics and the various structures of the bow were all straight to the point. Some of them even left Roddy unable to explain in detail. Halfway through, he had to search for information on the internet on the spot before he could explain them clearly. Why was the modern compound bow accurate? Why did the aero platform have to have a small contact area? What was the difference between the materials of the bow pieces? These seemingly specific questions, in fact, involved the most basic laws of physics. In the eyes of Kardashian, complex things were explained by extremely simple laws. This in itself was an indescribable beauty, and she was a little addicted to it. So, no matter how unromantic Roddy was, she could listen to him attentively. If it were not for the fact that the people in front of her had had enough fun, Roddy's questions would probably keep her talking until the end of the archery school. Roddy is here? Why, did he bring a beauty with him today? Chapter 801. The owner, Huang Li, was a young woman in her 30s. She used to be in the local sports bureau's archery team, so she could be considered a professional. Roddy often came to the archery club, so they were familiar with each other. However, Huang Li didn't think that Kardashian and Roddy would have anything to do with each other, so she couldn't help but ask a few questions. Well, I met a foreign friend on the internet. He came to Beijing to play, so I wanted to entertain him. Roddy casually explained, which made Huang Li show an "I understand" expression. Go. Here's the key. Those who were slightly skilled all had their own bows and arrows, and Roddy was no exception. His Desert Fox hunting bow and Easton alloy arrows were stored in the members' cabinet. He asked Kardashian to wait in the rest area while he went to get his bow and arrows. Desert Fox was an American-style longbow. In order to make it easier to store, he bought a 2-section bow. Before using it, he had to assemble and put on the bowstring. Roddy busied himself for a while. When he got up with the bow, he found that someone was talking to Kardashian, or rather, hitting on her. In fact, in this kind of situation, a normal conversation wouldn't cause any misunderstanding, but Roddy wasn't a fool. When he saw the guy in the silk shirt talking to Kardashian with a sanctimonious face, he realized that the term femme fatale wasn't used casually. Roddy had naturally heard of rich second-generation hitting on girls, but he had never seen it. However, when he glanced at the 2 bodyguards standing behind the guy, Roddy realized that the person in front of him was probably not an ordinary, rich second generation. However, no matter who the other party was, he was very unhappy. Of course, he wouldn't admit his thoughts. English? French? Or German? I only know a little Spanish. Zhao Hongwen, known as Mr. Zhao, was trying to communicate with Kardashian in various languages, but the latter obviously didn't understand what he was talking about. Her face with sunglasses was a little cold, and no matter what the other party said, she didn't say a word. Zhao Hongwen was 29 years old, 182 meters tall, and dressed very neatly. He didn't look like a fresh meat. He wore a weird-looking Famulin 8083 on his wrist, a low-key BV belt over his skinny legs, and a pair of ordinary Gucci sneakers. Compared to the rich second-generation students who were covered with big brand logos, he didn't look like a nouveau riche, but it was enough to tell others that he was either rich or noble. The 2 bodyguards separated the bystanders. Wang Onli was discussing the price with the boss, Huang Li. The latter frowned, obviously understanding that these people were not to be trifled with. Fortunately, it was a society ruled by law, and there were no clichés such as robbing women in the street. Zhao Hongwen relied on his identity and was very stylish when he struck up a conversation. Unfortunately, Kardashian didn't understand what he was talking about. When she saw Roddy coming over, she directly turned her head and said, "What does he want?" Roddy shrugged and asked Zhao Hongwen, "What's the matter?" He knew that this kind of person was not to be trifled with, but his tone was still not polite. Although there was a polite smile on his face, there was no smile in his eyes. Zhao Hongwen raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "I'm sorry, I thought this beauty came alone. My surname is Zhao Hongwen. Do you want to be friends?" He reached out his hand, but Roddy didn't respond at all. He turned to Kardashian and said, "Looks like a guy who wants to pursue you." Kardashian laughed, not because of Zhao Hongwen, but because of Roddy. Although this guy tried his best to cover it up, there was clearly something wrong with him. She inexplicably felt happy. She glanced at Zhao Hongwen, whose expression didn't change. He only narrowed his eyes and replied, "Is this guy very good? I don't think he and those two guys are that good. Why are they acting like young masters of nobility?" Roddy replied helplessly, "Strength is not measured by individual strength here, because no one is that good, is that so? You've already made your bow? Then why don't you go and shoot a set? I'll watch from the side." Kardashian said as she pushed Roddy to the 18-meter track at the edge of the venue, treating Zhao Hongwen like a decoration. However, the latter wasn't angry at all. Instead, he turned his head with interest and said to Wang Onli, who had come over, "Not bad. Interesting." Wang Onli had already asked a lot of questions, so he said in a low voice, "His name is Roddy, the one who scored 10th in the 18-meter track." As he spoke, he pointed at the scrolling screen. Zhao Hongwen glanced at Roddy's score and immediately laughed. He then patted Wang Onli's back in satisfaction. "No wonder you informed me. I'll remember your contribution." After that, he waved at the bodyguard behind him and said a few words. The latter turned around and left. Zhao Hongwen, on the other hand, strolled into the building. Every inch of land in Zhongguancun was worth its weight in gold. The archery building wasn't too big. 12 10-meter tracks were used by the owners, and 2 18-meter tracks were used by the owners. When Roddy came over, the regular customers had just left, so the 2 tracks were completely empty. He took out his Desert Fox, pulled out an arrow and said to Kardashian, "Based on the current materials and craftsmanship, the most consistent arrow should be the carbon fiber arrow. However, this thing is worn out, so I bought an aluminum arrow. You see, the tapered anti-collision arrow tail can save on replacement costs." Before he finished, Kardashian turned to look at Zhao Hongwen, who was strolling over, and said, "Although they look and dress different from the common nobles, the greed in their eyes is really no different. Bro, you also play with a hunting bow? Nowadays, everyone likes to get back together. I didn't expect to meet someone with similar interests." Zhao Hongwen's face was kind, and he didn't take the cold treatment to heart at all. When he spoke, he didn't even look at Kardashian, as if he really just wanted to chat with Roddy. That's really a coincidence. Roddy wasn't completely silent. At this time, ignoring the other person would be a form of stage fright, so he simply nodded and reached for an arrow, ready to shoot to shut the other person up. Zhao Hongwen stood on the side with his arms crossed. Although the two were polite, the people around them could roughly guess what was going on. Therefore, many people in the resting area turned to look at them, and for a moment, the archery building was much quieter. Chapter 802. In ancient times, strong bows and hard crossbows were not empty words. Kangxi the Great's bow was said to be 140 pounds, and the yew longbows of medieval England's longbowmen were generally more than 100 pounds, but long-term use would seriously deform the spine. In any case, Roddy had trained his body normally. In addition, he often shot arrows. His physical condition was still far from that of a fat otaku. At that moment, he could draw the bow smoothly. Normally, he would only be exhausted after shooting 15 sets of arrows with this bow. But as soon as the bow was drawn, countless images suddenly appeared in Roddy's mind. His vision blurred, and his action of releasing the arrow was severely distorted. Pa la, the bowstring swept across the arm guard, and the Easton aluminum arrow shot out violently, nailing itself to the edge of the grass target with a duo. At a distance of 10 meters, a small movement may not have any effect on the final result, but the further the distance, the error would be magnified. At 18 meters, Roddy's first arrow did not even touch the ring. Kardashian did not speak. Her eyes were fixed on Roddy's face. Roddy maintained his posture, but his brows were tightly furrowed, and his eyes were lowered. It was obvious that he was thinking about something. But this scene in the eyes of Zhao Hongwen was very simple. Roddy's mental quality was not good, and his physical strength was poor. This kind of mistake could be called low-level, and he was indeed an unorthodox rookie. But he did not show any expression of ridicule. Instead, he was calm and did not even say a word, continuing to watch with his arms crossed. The second arrow was drawn, and images appeared in front of Roddy's eyes. He felt that the bow in his hand had become a gate switch. Every time he pulled it, memories that he had never had before would surge out. The ceremony in the square of Hollier City, the stubborn gaze of the wood elf Natha, the pale face of Lucifron Duke when he came back to his senses. His fingers could no longer hold the arrow, but he managed to make a temporary adjustment and barely completed the release. The arrow still flew out in an unstable manner, but this time it was obviously better, nailing into the sixth ring. Roddy took a deep breath and rubbed his temples. He turned to look at Kardashian, but the latter was wearing sunglasses, and her expressionless face did not reveal much information. Roddy could only slow down for a moment, and then began to draw the bow and shoot the third arrow. In Zhao Hongwen's eyes, this was a sign that he was forcing himself to use the bow. In other words, he was trying to show off, and he had already failed. Roddy then shot 5 arrows, and his results were extremely unstable. One nailed into the 9th ring, but the other 4 were all outside the 7th ring. The arrows on the small archery target were scattered everywhere, and it did not look much different from the newbies 10 meters away. Roddy! Kardashian finally could not help but cry out. She saw large drops of sweat on Roddy's forehead, and it was definitely not caused by pulling the bow. The latter was in a daze. She wiped the sweat off her forehead and slowly said, "I remember a name, Marinsura." The corner of Kardashian's mouth froze slightly when she heard this name, but she quickly returned to normal. Roddy did not notice this. He frowned and muttered to himself, "How did I get involved with dragons?" Zhao Hongwen, who was beside him, naturally did not know what he was talking about. This young master Zhao looked at the archery target in the distance, and he already knew what kind of person his opponent was. The bodyguard who had left just now came back with a dark green equipment box. He put it on the ground, and after the combination lock was unlocked, the bow embedded in the shockproof cotton was revealed. This movement naturally attracted Kardashian's attention. Zhao Hongwen saw her turn her head to observe, and he naturally understood that she had taken the bait. However, this young Master Zhao did not immediately show off, but quietly began to assemble his recurve bow. The bow box was very large, and recurve bows did not take up as much space as longbows did. Roddy's Desert Fox was a 2-stage bow, while most recurve bows had 3 stages. To put it bluntly, 2 individual bow pieces were installed on the bow handle with special screws. There were 2 sets of bows in the bow box. One of them was black and red with dark wood grain, and there was a black spider logo on the bow handle. This was the high-end American custom-made hunting bow, the Black Widow bow. The bow piece was clamped with red carbon, and the arrow was fast. The bow body was light and easy to hold. There was also the bow maker's signature on the handle, and the bow piece was marked with the pull distance and weight. Zhao Hongwen clearly exercised regularly, and his body was well proportioned. The bow piece had a pull distance of 27 inches, and it weighed 60 pounds, which was 10 pounds more than Roddy. However, he did not assemble this Black Widow bow. Instead, he took out another recurve bow wrapped in a black velvet bag. The bodyguards did not come to help, because they all knew that the young master liked to earn his own living when it came to picking up girls. After all, at Zhao Hongwen's level, he was much more demanding of women than the average second generation. It could even be said that beauty was just the lowest threshold, and temperament was what attracted him the most. Truly exquisite women were basically not sensitive to money. He was born into an aristocratic family, and anyone who could enter this circle would not be short of money. However, no matter how much the daughter of a nouveau riche went abroad to further her studies, there was no way she could compare to the descendants of the red aristocrats from half a century ago. The foundation and confidence bestowed by power could not be bought with money. In comparison, the only thing that the third or fourth generation of the country envied was the old aristocrats or royal families that had been passed down for hundreds of years. Although young Master Zhao did not want to admit it, he did see a confidence in Kardashian that even he did not have. Ordinary people might think that she was cold, but with Kardashian wearing sunglasses, standing casually, he felt that he had to build up the courage to talk to her. This feeling he had not experienced for many years. Because of this, Zhao Hongwen felt that he had to take everything seriously. He was even prepared to fail, because Zhao Hongwen felt that people like Roddy and Kardashian were in two completely different worlds, and there was no possibility of them being together. If there was, he was probably the only one who had the qualifications and confidence. The main process of wooing a woman was to show off one's personal charm, and the lowest way was to stick the words, "I'm rich," on one's forehead. Zhao Hongwen scoffed at this, so even when he took out the black-tail recurve bow, which was worth more than $50,000, he did not have the slightest intention of showing off. Black-tail was translated into Chinese as black-tail, and was considered a top American hunting bow custom-made brand. At this level, the performance was impeccable. Most importantly, it provided extremely gorgeous bow engravings, and even the fixing screws could be made into a pure gold pattern. This kind of style was the favorite of the rich princes of the Middle East, and any one of them would be qualified as a work of art at home. However, Zhao Hongwen did not like to be too ostentatious. The black-tail bow in his hand was dark red, and the bow handle did not have any complicated decorations, only a row of abbreviations inlaid in silver. The fixing screws were made of brass, and the bowstring was black and red. The sealskin arrow stand seemed to have been changed frequently, and it was obvious that this bow was used frequently, not just for decoration. The bow was marked with 46 pounds, which was actually lower than the desert fox used by Roddy. This was because at a distance of 18 meters, bows over 40 pounds did not make much difference, and the lower the weight, the better the stability and the higher the accuracy. Zhao Hongwen skillfully assembled the bow, put the bowstring on, and adjusted it a few times. Then he took out a dozen charcoal arrows and put them in the quiver beside his right leg. He took a deep breath and began to prepare as if there was no one around, and then he began to shoot. Roddy's shooting interval was very long, which was completely different from his usual performance in the archery hall. This was because every time he pulled the bow, Roddy would have a painful expression on his face, and then he would shoot hesitantly. This caused 3 arrows to miss the target after a set of arrows, and the rest of the arrows only added up to 54 points. However, the archery hall had a rule. Within the same area, everyone could only draw their arrows after shooting out all their arrows. Therefore, Roddy could only wait for Zhao Hongwen to finish shooting his first set of arrows. The latter did not waste any time either. He raised his hand and shot the first arrow, hitting the 7th ring, then the 8th ring, the 9th ring, the 10th ring, the 8th ring. After a short period of adjustment, all 6 arrows were within the 9th ring. For a hunting bow that could not aim, this kind of accuracy was already very good. At this moment, the contrast between the two people's targets was very strong. Roddy's arrows were scattered everywhere, and the tails of the arrows were crooked in all directions. On the other hand, Zhao Hongwen's targets were very concentrated. The black carbon arrows were thinner than Easton's aluminum arrows, and when they hit the target, they formed a straight cluster. This scene naturally attracted a lot of onlookers, and many people took out their watches and began to take pictures. Not far away, the boss Huang Li was also watching with interest. She had a solid foundation, and naturally could see Zhao Hongwen's strength. She estimated that if he performed steadily, he could directly be ranked in the top 3 of the 18-meter shooting list. After the two finished shooting their first set, they entered the shooting range together and began to draw their arrows. The cold sweat on Roddy's forehead was outrageous, and Zhao Hongwen was a little surprised to see it. Is his mental quality bad, or is his physical quality bad? Just one set of arrows and he's already like this? He did not think too much about it. Since Roddy put on an attitude of not wanting to pay attention to him, Zhao Hongwen was also too lazy to say anything. After all, his target was Kardashian. After drawing the arrows, the two people simultaneously threw the arrows into the quiver. Roddy had already wiped his sweat 3 times along the way, and his complexion looked very bad. Kardashian noticed this and reached out to stop him. Let's rest for a while. Roddy was indeed a little absent-minded. During the 20 meters from the shooting range, what flashed past his eyes were the howling snow monsters in a world of ice and snow, and a graceful figure disappearing into the snow. Marinsura. When he said this name for the second time, the corner of Kardashian's eyes twitched. Finally, she could not help but reply, "She's already dead." This sentence was like a sudden clap of thunder that woke Roddy up. He suddenly raised his head, and the endless stream of memories in his mind instantly stopped. This immediately made Kardashian realize that she had made a mistake. She covered her mouth in regret, but when she saw Roddy's pale face, she felt sorry for him and said, "Let's stop shooting for now and rest for a while." Although Roddy wanted to win, he also knew his own limit. His usual strength was not inferior to that fellow, but he was in a terrible state now. He knew that the other party was mocking him, and if he forced himself to continue, it would not end well for him. So he nodded, walked to the private resting area behind the 18-meter track, and sat down. This action surprised Zhao Hongwen. He did not expect Roddy to back down so quickly. He said, "Bro, aren't you going to continue?" "Let me." To everyone's surprise, the one who answered him was Kardashian. At the same time, she did not speak in Bulinga, but in Mandarin with a strange accent. It was obvious that this was the result of a few hours of shopping. "Don't joke around your arm." Roddy immediately wanted to stand up and pull her back, but Kardashian reached out to take off her sunglasses and held him down. "I don't like that fellow for a long time." She had always been submissive in front of Roddy, but at this moment, the determination in her eyes was irresistible to Roddy. However, Kardashian's domineering attitude was not directed at him. The corner of her mouth curled up, and she squinted her eyes and looked at him. "You've bandaged it well. Shooting is not a problem." After saying that, she stuffed the sunglasses into Roddy's hand, and turned to the bow rack where the desert fox was placed. At this moment, there seemed to be no sound in the archery hall. Kardashian looked around in confusion, and only then did she realize that many people were staring at her in a daze. She turned her head, and Zhao Hongwen, who was holding the blacktail recurve bow, reached out to rub his eyes, as if to confirm that he did not see wrongly. He had previously guessed that Kardashian's appearance would not be too bad, but he never thought that his guess would be 99 points, and the answer would be 120 points. This made Zhao Hongwen, who always prided himself on being calm in the face of danger, lose his composure. But after all, he was a man who had seen countless women. He quickly controlled his expression, and at the same time, tried not to show any flattering smile. He nodded at Kardashian indifferently, turned his head, and buckled a carbon arrow on the bowstring. He did not think that Kardashian could shoot an arrow, not to mention that Roddy's bow was 50 pounds. An untrained adult would not be able to draw the bow steadily, let alone Kardashian, who did not look strong. Click. Kardashian was putting on the leather arm guard, and after the arrow's tail was inserted into the bowstring, Zhao Hongwen could not help but glance to the left. He saw that she had reached out to pick up the desert fox, and with her right hand she pulled the bowstring back, and easily pulled it to a full moon. After this simple attempt, Kardashian put on Roddy's hip leather finger guard, and pulled the quiver to the back of her body. She casually picked up an arrow, put it behind the bow window, and held the bow horizontally. Normally, when shooting with a hunting bow, the bow would be tilted at about 30 to 45 degrees, but no one had ever held it horizontally. Zhao Hongwen was stunned, and the people around him also began to whisper. But Kardashian raised her arm forward, pulled the bowstring with her right hand, and exerted strength from her back. She easily pulled the bow to its full extent and released it. This was definitely not an impromptu technical move, because her hand holding the bow was stable, and the arrow that shot out did not have any strange swaying movements, and the bowstring did not sweep her forearm. Tut, the arrow nailed above the 9th ring. 2 chapters in total, 4,000 words. Since they had decided to go to Thailand in a few days, they worked hard to save up the manuscript. Chapter 803. Everyone was shocked, but before they could move their eyes away from the target, the second arrow had already nailed into the outer ring of the 10 rings. The 10 rings were divided into the inner and outer ring, with the inner ring being smaller. If the overall score was the same, then it would depend on who took up more of the inner ring. Kardashian's shooting speed was beyond imagination because she was using the archery skills of the High Elves. No matter where it was, the skills that could be used on the battlefield were always fast, accurate, and ruthless. So, she was almost shooting 1 arrow per second. Her left hand holding the bow didn't move, and her right hand didn't even look as she pulled out the arrows from the quiver. Her movements were like floating clouds and flowing water, and she shot all 12 arrows in one go. From start to finish, it only took about 10 seconds. The crowd heard a sound that they rarely heard before echoing in the archery hall. It was the sound of arrows rubbing against each other, and the sound of arrow tails shattering when they collided with each other. In other words, other than the first arrow, which was 9 rings, Kardashian's remaining 11 arrows were all 10 rings, for a total of 119 rings. And because most of the arrows were in the inner ring, there were scenes of 3 arrow tails shattering. If Zhao Hongwen's targets were said to be densely packed before, then the targets in front of Kardashian could no longer be called densely packed, because all the arrows were stuck close to each other. The 10 rings target paper had completely disappeared, and all that could be seen was a sea of red and white arrows squeezed together. Putting the desert fox aside, Kardashian crossed her arms and looked at Zhao Hongwen with a faint smile. The meaning was clear: it's your turn. Zhao Hongwen felt his scalp tingle. It wasn't like he hadn't seen accurate archery before, but to be able to shoot 1 arrow per second and still maintain such accuracy was unheard of. After all, this world had long since moved away from cold weapons. It wasn't like the ancient times where people trained their shooting speed all day just to go on the battlefield. Moreover, this kind of rapid shooting was too unbelievable. Zhao Hongwen had studied the shooting methods of various countries, but he had never seen Kardashian holding the bow like this. What the hell? In the past, when he was picking up girls, he had seen people who were more knowledgeable than him and had read more books than him. However, he had never thought that he would be humiliated by a woman in a sport that only men like. But as a man, he had no way out at this moment. He drew his bow and nocked an arrow. He tried to adjust his breathing and calm his mind before he began to shoot. It had to be said that Zhao Hongwen's psychological quality was extremely strong. In this kind of situation, he was able to perform explosively. The number of points he shot basically reached his best level, 115 points. The onlookers all raised their watches and various kinds of camera equipment. The players who were originally at the 10-meter path also put down their bows and ran over to watch. Zhao Hongwen felt that his back was a little wet after shooting a set of arrows. Looking back, he found that Kardashian had no intention of paying attention to this side. Instead, she was sitting next to Roddy and talking about something. At this moment, the latter's face had returned to normal. Zhao Hongwen did not know if he had some kind of illusion, but he suddenly felt that this otaku seemed to have changed in some way. His eyes and posture were somewhat similar to those of the elders in the military system in his family, but it did not matter. Although he only shot 2 sets of arrows, he won against Roddy and lost to Kardashian. There was no real shame in it. If he met a monster, he could not blame himself for not being strong enough. He could only blame himself for being unlucky. Losing to the woman he wanted to pursue was not a big deal. On the contrary, it meant that he would have more opportunities to interact with her. So he put on a harmless smile and walked towards Kardashian. Just as he was about to say a few words to get close to her, he found that Roddy slowly stood up. At this time, Roddy had completely recovered from the state of lost soul. Piece by piece, the puzzle pieces of memory were gradually pieced together. He finally understood that the world in front of him and the world of the Castellan of Elson City were facts that he had experienced in his life. However, it was still difficult for him to remember everything about Kardashian. The only thing he could be sure of was that this Dragons was a trustworthy partner. But just a partner? After realizing Zhao Hongwen's intention, Roddy's previously suppressed anger suddenly burst out. As a person who could make a name for himself in the kingdom of Karen, Roddy was not someone who would suffer losses. All those who provoked him, without exception, suffered his revenge. So when his eyes met with Zhao Hongwen's, although there was no verbal communication, Mr. Zhao still stopped in his tracks. Zhao Hongwen's physical instinct, as if he was facing a formidable enemy, made him clench the bow. Roddy was expressionless, but Zhao Hongwen did feel a sense of danger that he had never experienced before. Not only him, but the 2 bodyguards next to him also looked serious and took 2 steps forward. But Roddy suddenly looked away and turned to Huang Li, who was not far away, and said, "Boss, let's start a round." What he meant was to conduct a group calculation. 5 sets of 60 arrows, and the results would be included in the overall ranking of the members. Okay. With an authentic Beijing accent, the staff immediately began to change the target paper for the 18-meter course and brought the spare arrows for Roddy. The scoring screen, that was originally turned off, was turned on. This was a special device only installed on the 18-meter course. The other 10 meters were not installed at all. At the same time, Huang Li also said something and changed the display screen in the resting area of the archery hall to target monitoring. Roddy stepped forward to pull out the arrows. 5 arrows with broken tails and deformed feathers were picked out. He replaced them with 5 new ones and returned to the quiver. He picked up the desert fox and looked at it. Then he turned around and began to adjust the bowstring. Zhao Hongwen's mouth twitched. He did not understand the situation. This guy just made a fool of himself, and now he still dares to show up? What is this? Sending himself to my door for me to step on? He glanced at Kardashian. The words, national beauty, lingered in his mind. Although he realized that something was wrong, how could he retreat in front of such a beauty? With a cold snort, Zhao Hongwen turned his head and shouted, "Wang Onli." Wang Onli, who had been standing in the crowd, naturally understood what he meant. He responded and began to discuss with Huang Li. Within a few minutes, the scoring screen was turned on the 2 18-meter courses. This was obviously a challenge. Zhao Hongwen did not take Roddy seriously at this time. He stepped forward, held his breath, and began to shoot. In his view, this performance was completely to leave an impression on Kardashian. Zhao Hongwen admitted in his heart that Kardashian was the target that had given him the most pressure so far. Her charm was mixed with the disdain of the secular world. He even had an illusion that she did not care about the life and death of others. Her eyes were always looking down on others. Zhao Hongwen himself had the mentality of looking down on others, but he would never show it so naturally. This made him find a real life goal. At this time, pursuing Kardashian had become conquering this goddess. That's right, he really did treat a woman he had never met as a goddess that he needed to look up and observe. As for Roddy, this kind of character was the best stepping stone to get close to the goddess. With this thought, he directly began to shoot the first arrow. Under the stimulation of Kardashian's gaze, Zhao Hongwen felt the blood in his body boiling, and his condition was unprecedentedly good. After shooting a set of arrows, he actually rear-ended 2 times. 117 points. The audience in the archery pavilion could see the score displayed on the screen, and they could also see the situation of the target recorded by the surveillance camera at close range. Zhao Hongwen, who had once again increased the intensity of the arrows, performed exceptionally well, but his face was very calm. After shooting the arrows, he sat on the chair next to him and waited for Roddy. At this time, Roddy, who had twisted the bowstring 3 more times, finally put the bow back on the bowstring. His eyes were no longer evasive or timid. He glanced at the audience, then went to the quiver and began to shoot steadily. The first arrow, 10 points. The second arrow, 10 points. The third arrow, 10 points. The 3 arrows formed an equilateral triangle and occupied the entire 10 points inner ring. In other words, if he continued to hit the inner ring, there was a high probability that it would cause friction or collision with these arrows. The audience began to exclaim because the arrangement of the 3 arrows was too standard. From the perspective of the surveillance camera, it was as if they had deliberately drawn an equilateral triangle. However, at this time, Roddy did not continue to shoot. Instead, he went forward to remove the 3 arrows, returned to the starting point and raised the bow again. 3 arrows nailed into the inner ring, and the most frightening thing was that the position of the arrows nailed was exactly the same as the previous 3 arrows. In this way, Roddy shot every 3 arrows and went forward to pull out an arrow. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that he did this to reduce arrow wastage, because all the arrows were in the inner ring of the 10 points. At the end of the first group, Zhao Hongwen felt that his hands were slightly trembling. He did not understand what happened to Roddy. How did a guy who had continuously missed the target suddenly become a master bow hunter? The arrow trajectory of 18 meters was indeed a lot closer than the distance of 30 to 50 meters in hunting, but even the world's top master bow hunter would not have such abnormal accuracy. He could see that the 3 arrows shot by Roddy were in the exact same position and order. After a group of arrows was shot, there were really only 3 holes on the brand new white paper. When the second group began, he braced himself and began to shoot again. In the end, he scored 116 points. But Roddy continued to get full marks without any suspense. Finally, he realized that if this continued, there would be rumors of him being abused by passers-by in the future. In the third group, he waved his hand to signal Roddy to shoot while he stood there and struggled with himself. Roddy glanced at him and suddenly changed his shooting method. He took off the hip leather finger guard, took a plastic thumb ring from the service desk, and started to shoot in the Mongolian style with an American-style hunting bow on the left side. Dong, dong, dong. The Mongolian style of drawing a bow required pulling the string over the ear. After increasing the pulling distance, the force provided by the bow suddenly increased to more than 60 pounds, which changed the sound of the arrows hitting the grass target. What was more amazing was that the 3 arrows were almost shot in succession, but they were all concentrated on the target. It was still the same 3 holes. So the audience listened to the 3 consecutive sounds 4 times and looked at the scoreboard that showed the words 120 points again. At this point, there was no point in continuing the competition. Roddy's move made Zhao Hongwen completely speechless. He originally thought that Kardashian was a monster, but he did not expect to meet a cheat. Although ancient archers often had cheats, it was really unreasonable to meet one in the archery hall. He simply stopped the competition and did not continue shooting. But Roddy did not stop. He did not leave any leeway in this matter. The next 2 groups of arrows did not pull arrows back and forth, but occupied the outer circle of 10 points. The audience watched as Roddy continuously drew a circle on the target in a clockwise direction. 600 points, full score. This was Roddy's final score. When the last arrow was nailed in the center of the target, the whole archery hall was filled with applause. When Roddy looked around, Zhao Hongwen had disappeared. He only saw Kardashian coming over with a sweet smile and pulling him out of the archery hall. She consciously put on her sunglasses, but when she walked out of the mall, she found it was already dark, so she took them off. Walking beside her, Roddy did not lower his head like before, but silently looked around, as if he just came to Zhongguancun today. "I can't believe I can travel through time." He shook his head and said helplessly, "I didn't expect to come back." This kind of experience was too bizarre, and even more bizarre was that there was a dragons who did not belong to this world with him. He did not expect that the secret of travel through time, which might be taken to the grave, was known by a dragons who had a good relationship with him. So what did this mean? Roddy frowned and thought for a long time, trying to infer the relationship between them from the various signs after he met Kardashian, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt that this dragons seemed to have a very close relationship with him. And just now in the archery hall, was it because of personal revenge, or because of some other reason that he played that scoring match? He suddenly felt a little shocked. What was wrong with him? Carrying a pile of shopping bags, Roddy found that he had spent money like water these days, but he did not feel the slightest bit of heartache. What did this mean? He bowed his head in confusion, because at this moment, he was trying to recall the figures of Akasha and Sally, but from time to time, the scene where Kardashian saved him flashed across his mind. The chaotic memories of time and space made Roddy lost in thought for a moment, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. According to common sense, Kardashian's mouth would not be idle, but she was looking down and counting the number of stone slabs on the sidewalk. Whenever she did something embarrassing, Kardashian would use this method to distract herself. Obviously, at this moment, it was not only Roddy whose mind was in a mess. This dragons was also very nervous about the impulsiveness from before. Chapter 804. This was an area waiting to be demolished. The ground had not been repaired for many years and was uneven. Roddy walked through it and led Kardashian to a small shop on the street. He opened the refrigerator pretending to choose a drink and asked in a low voice, "You noticed it too? 4 people. 2 of them have been circling around from the side, and the other 2 are taking turns to follow us." Although Kardashian had become an ordinary person, her senses, intelligence, and physical fitness were unparalleled. Roddy was a little stunned. Even with his ability, he only noticed the 2 guys who were circling around behind them. He didn't realize that there were 2 people taking turns to follow them. However, Roddy guessed that it must be Zhao Hongwen who was able to follow them at this time. Thinking of this, Roddy couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. He was eager to take revenge just now, but he didn't realize that this was modern society. Here, people didn't look at personal strength, only background power. If it was in AFTA, the grass on the grave of those who dared to follow him would probably be a few meters high. But Roddy and Kardashian weren't vegetarians. No matter where they were, they had to deal with this kind of tracker as soon as possible. And Roddy didn't dare to casually punish them now. Thinking of the speed of the police in the capital, he didn't want to become a wanted person by the police. With this thought in mind, he explained to Kardashian the concepts of police station, police, and national power for a long time, and constantly emphasized that they couldn't be too harsh. Although Kardashian didn't quite understand, Roddy was a local, after all, so she still listened to him. Roddy originally wanted to take them down one by one, but Kardashian thought that this would definitely alert the enemy, so she suggested that they go for an ambush separately. Roddy thought about her identity and ability, and finally agreed. So in the next few minutes, he took Kardashian around and finally turned into an unusually dark alley because there were no street lights. The two of them separated, one to the left and the other to the right. After a few steps, they disappeared into the darkness. Roddy held his breath and slowly walked to the back of a few garbage bins in the dark. This was the low-rent housing area rented by office workers. There was a lot of garbage, and the nauseating smell made Roddy frown. However, this kind of waiting did not last long. He heard a series of messy footsteps. Where is he? This place is too dark. I can't take a picture. I lost him. It's not like he's here. What is he doing here? When Roddy heard their conversation, his heart skipped a beat. How did they know he didn't live here? Could they be from the relevant department? But he soon overturned this judgment, because the two people who were talking were already talking about something else. How much did you film? From the time we left the archery dojo until now, there are around 200 of them. This foreign girl is too attractive. She's even better than those celebrities. It's just that it's hard to take pictures of her face with her hood. Most of the pictures can only be taken of her profile. That's enough. Well, that's all for today. Let's pack up and leave. As soon as the fat man's voice fell, he felt a gust of wind behind him. He didn't even have time to turn his head before he felt a pain in his neck. Then, his vision turned black and he fainted. The guy next to him, who seemed to be his subordinate, was stunned. Because it was dark, he didn't even react to the fact that the fat man was attacked. He subconsciously asked, "Who is it?" The answer to him was a standard "Black Tiger steals the heart." After his diaphragm was hit hard, the young man curled up with a "ugh." As a result, when he lowered his head, a knee hit his forehead. After a muffled bang, the alley returned to silence. Roddy looked up at both sides. He came here after confirming that there were no surveillance cameras. Now it seemed that they were not captured. While breathing a sigh of relief, Roddy lowered his head to observe the two people who were knocked out. In the past, the otaku Roddy might not even have the courage to make a move. But now, he was very skilled in searching. Soon, he found the two sets of SLR cameras they carried. When he was searching, he was very careful not to start directly. Instead, he tore a piece of garbage bag from the garbage pile next to him and used it as a glove to eliminate the risk of leaving fingerprints. Today's cameras were not big, but the lens was still like a Canon because of the long focal length. Roddy frowned as he looked at the photos. When he found that the subjects were all Kardashian, he had a rough idea in his heart. These two people were probably the legendary paparazzi. He remembered the few messages he saw on Weibo. He was surprised and a little helpless. Kardashian's appearance was too amazing. She just casually came out and caused so much trouble. Before he recovered his memory, he was ignorant and obviously didn't realize the lethality of it. Now that he had figured it out, it was better to be cautious in the future. Although Roddy was not a photographer, he had bought an SLR of the same brand, so he was quite familiar with the operation. After he confirmed that the photos were not uploaded to the cloud disk, he clicked Format. As for the smart watches of the two people, because he used iris scanning to unlock them, he did not have the authority to check the contents, so he took it off and put it aside, then lifted his foot and crushed it. The things were not lost, but the watches were damaged. Even if the paparazzi went to the police station, no one would care. Roddy was well aware of the police's thoughts, so he was not worried about getting into trouble. Getting up and moving his hands and feet, Roddy suddenly felt that the 2 shots just now made a vague impression in his mind. But now that the matter was over, there was no point in staying here. He turned around to look for Kardashian. After a few steps, he thought of a problem. These paparazzi were probably not sent by Zhao Hongwen. Then what about the other 2 people who followed them? Just as he was about to quicken his pace, a soft shout came from a dark corner not far away, followed by a bang sound. The crow on the electric pole more than 10 meters away suddenly flew up, squawking in the dark night, and flew away. Roddy's face changed dramatically. He rushed around the corner. Because there were no street lights on this road, he could barely make out the objects by the reflection of the neon lights of the distant shopping mall. But he could clearly see the frail figure in the hoodie retreating in the dark. The other tall guy obviously had the upper hand in the fight, forcing her step by step into the corner. Seeing this situation, Roddy suddenly became furious. Not only did he dare to follow them, but he also dared to directly hit a woman? He gritted his teeth and prepared to attack the black figure from behind. Unexpectedly, just after he rushed out 2 steps, he heard the sound of clothes rustling behind him. Roddy looked back and saw a slightly thinner figure rushing towards him. "Come and help." The one who spoke was the man who was pressuring Kardashian. His voice was muffled and had a slight accent. Obviously, he was not a native of the Imperial City. Combining this scene, Roddy immediately realized that the guy who rushed over from behind should be the partner of the 2 when they took turns to stalk. So without saying a word, he twisted his body and punched out. The current Roddy was like a different person from 2 hours ago. The otaku Roddy only knew one move in combat, which was Tortoise Fist. But after recovering part of his memory, he naturally knew how to use his body after coming back alive from the battlefield. Shifting his center of gravity forward, twisting his waist, turning around and swinging his arm, all in one go. Roddy's fist headed straight for the neck of the person who came over. Although the guy who ran over had never fought with the enemy on the battlefield, he was someone who had won awards in the military. Now, although he was not training in the military camp, he basically spent most of his time in various combat clubs. His combat experience was far richer than the average soldier. Seeing the incoming fist, he almost instinctively made a blocking action. Pa! Roddy's fist landed on the side of the opponent's left arm. He originally thought that he would at least be able to knock the opponent off balance. Unexpectedly, the opponent only tilted his body, and his center of gravity did not change at all. Instead, his own arm was bounced off, and his entire arm seemed to be paralyzed. It felt like he had hit an iron plate. Roddy immediately cursed in his heart. This was Earth, and his body was just that of an ordinary otaku. Even if his posture was correct and his strength was greater than a normal person's, he still could not compare to someone who had truly received training. For a red noble like Zhao Hongwen, the elders in his family were all protected by professional guards. Although he couldn't openly bring active soldiers with him as his bodyguards, his family could use their connections to hire retired military experts. The 2 people in front of him were experts who had placed in the top 3 in the military. After all, China was a society that banned guns. Those shooting champion soldiers who became bodyguards basically mastered the dragon slaying technique, which was easier to deal with than using their fists and feet. After the competition at the archery school, Zhao Hongwen naturally would not pretend that nothing had happened after being slapped in the face. He got into the Audi A8 driven by his butler and waved his hand to direct the 2 bodyguards to directly track Roddy and Kardashian's address. The 2 soldiers had never stayed in the National Security Bureau, so naturally, they did not systematically learn tracking technique. Thus, they were discovered and counterattacked by Kardashian. However, the 2 of them originally did not intend to have any conflict. After all, Zhao Hongwen's intention to pick up girls was very obvious. Their mission was to find out the address, but now they were fighting. How could this end? Against two ordinary people, they could just block and turn around and leave. However, the reality was that Kardashian's fists and feet were too fierce. If it was not for her left arm being injured and unable to exert her strength, perhaps in a few rounds, this 184 military champion would have been defeated. At this time, both sides were surprised by the other's toughness. However, this kind of thinking did not cause their movements to pause. Roddy immediately raised his leg after his attack failed, but this 174 skinny man in front of him was very well protected. His ability to resist attacks was extremely strong, and he easily blocked Roddy's horizontal kick. Chapter 805. This was the huge difference in strength and resistance. Fortunately, Roddy had a good judgment. If he had retracted his arm a little slower, he would have been caught by the opponent and pinned to the ground. Roddy had the will, but the strength was insufficient. It was not that he had not thought of using tricks or other skills. However, this was not a martial arts contest like in Jin Yong's book, where every move had a name. There were only a few moves in actual combat. It was a competition of strength, speed, and experience. In this world without magic, even if Roddy recovered his memory as a witcher, it was limited to the improvement of his archery skills. He was not as good at hand-to-hand combat as the barbarian mercenaries. Roddy could not keep up with his experience and strength. From the third move, he fell into a situation of taking a beating. He could only keep retreating to reduce the damage. Because of the dim environment, Roddy's forehead was hit by the opponent's fist in time. He felt the scenery in front of him was shaking. But at this moment, a new picture appeared in his mind. Augustine's pale face, the struggle of the undead army in the flood, but this was not what Roddy wanted to see. He was in a trance, and his left arm was kicked again. This kick was more than twice as strong as his. It was as if he had been hit by a car, and he almost fell to the ground on the spot. Roddy staggered 2 steps, and just as he steadied himself, he saw the opponent's fist coming at him. He raised his hand to block, but before he could make contact, he heard a muffled sound. Kardashian yelled, and swept her long leg across, causing the short bodyguard to take a few steps back on the spot. She was suppressed by the big man just now, but in fact, she quickly adjusted her position to dodge. It just so happened that Roddy kept retreating into her attack range, so she could save the situation with this kick. Although her 178 centimeters body looked slender, she was much stronger than Roddy. But at this time, in order to help Roddy, Kardashian had to block the strong man's punch. Her injured left arm was in great pain, and she could not use her strength. She took 2 steps back and leaned against the electric pole behind her. Close combat was not a martial arts arena. The big guy, who was panting heavily, only wanted to quickly end the battle in order to protect himself. He then swung his fist at Kardashian's head, but this punch was interrupted by Roddy's full strength. Go to hell. He ignored the images that kept appearing in his mind. The roaring Roddy had only one thought in his mind. In this unbalanced battle, Kardashian, who had the advantage in experience and strength, was the only hope to turn the tables. As a burden, the only thing he could do was to give her a chance. He had experienced a lot of battles, so his judgment in this kind of battle was very accurate and decisive. After completely giving up on attacking, Roddy immediately decided to stop the burly bodyguard. With a few sprints, he forced the bodyguard to take a step back. However, the bodyguard's elbow and knee strike made Roddy let out a muffled groan. It was as if his internal organs were misplaced. He had to grit his teeth to keep himself from falling to the ground. But at this time, Kardashian readjusted her center of gravity and rushed forward. Roddy was fighting by instinct at this time. He saw the thin man rushing over from the side from the corner of his eyes. Because of the heavy blow, he could not lift his head. He shifted his center of gravity and exerted force on his feet, using his last breath to block the opponent's path to Kardashian. Sure enough, the guy had no choice but to change his move at the last minute. He lifted his foot and kicked Roddy, sending him flying to the ground on the spot. However, at this time, Kardashian had already completed the backward kick and kicked the strong bodyguard who weighed nearly 200 pounds away on the spot. Because the big guy had just been hit by Roddy's knee, he did not have a stable footing, so he had no choice but to take Kardashian's kick. His forearm in front of his chest broke with a crack, and his whole body flew out and lay directly on the ground, unable to get up for a long time. And the short bodyguard who rushed over was obviously no match for Kardashian. His 173 centimeters height was suppressed by Kardashian's 178 centimeters height, and the speed that he was proud of was not as fast as her. What was more terrifying was that he was only punched in the shoulder, but his whole arm was dislocated on the spot, and he could no longer exert strength. He wanted to dodge in a hurry, but it was too late. His other arm was grabbed by the dragons, and he tripped and fell to the ground. His face was pressed against the ground by the slender but powerful hand, and he fainted with a bang. Kardashian's face was pale, and her left arm was hanging. She got up and rushed to the side of the strong bodyguard who was struggling to get up. When the latter saw the evil star coming in front of him, he wanted to roll away, but she accurately and quickly kicked his abdomen. When the other party couldn't help but curl up his body, she kicked him directly in the face for the second time, and the latter directly went into shock and fainted. In fact, if she really used force, Kardashian's kick might even break his skull. But when she lifted her foot, she finally stopped, because Kardashian remembered clearly what Roddy said, and in the end, she did not kill him. The two enemies were not moving, and Kardashian bent over and held her knees, gasping for breath. High-intensity fighting was extremely exhausting. Not to mention the wound on her left arm, her hands and feet, whether attacking or defending, were burning because of the fierce collision. She limped to Roddy and just wanted to say something. She saw Roddy turn over, lying on his side on the ground, and said in a hoarse voice, "I really didn't expect to meet such a tough guy. Who are these people? Based on their temperament, they should be from the army, equivalent to the elite of the National Army. Hiss. By the way, take the things we bought." Roddy gritted his teeth and climbed up from the ground, but the pain made his face pale. He felt as if he was really hit by a car, and his hip bone hurt so much that he could not even walk. As soon as he took a step forward, his body involuntarily tilted to the other side. Just when he felt that he was about to die again, Kardashian took advantage of the opportunity to put his arm on her shoulder and whispered, "Can we go back like this?" Roddy was obviously stunned, and his mouth opened and finally said, "Yes. Let's go out of this small alley, don't be seen." Looking back at the two unconscious people, Roddy narrowed his eyes and did not say anything. His nose was full of Kardashian's faint body fragrance, which made him a little absent-minded. Neither of them was in a very good state. Kardashian carried the bags in her left hand, and Roddy was on the right. The latter walked while booking a car through the app. When the two walked to the main road outside the alley, the car driver just got off and opened the door for them. Roddy chose the nearest car, and he did not care about the price, so he got a top-of-the-line Honda Odyssey. This was the first time Kardashian sat in a car. When she saw the back door of the electric slide open, she was a little dazed. Thanks to Roddy's reminder, she remembered to get in. The door closed, and the noise outside suddenly disappeared. The soft back seat of the Odyssey made Roddy heave a sigh of relief. The pain was nothing. What really troubled Roddy was the current problem. Although he was beaten a lot in the battle with Kardashian, the things that were sealed in his mind were completely restored. In other words, Roddy now understood why he was here. However, Kardashian did not know. Sitting in the boss seat, she looked out the window at the retreating scenery. Her arm on the armrest was slightly trembling, and it was obvious that she was restless. She could not tell whether she was amazed by the quiet and comfortable car, or because of Roddy desperately blocking in front of her during the battle. The two bodyguards were like ants in the eyes of the Dragon Clan, but they had become enemies that were difficult to deal with here. The second time Roddy entered the space-time prison, it was because he blocked in front of her, and now he was beaten several times because of her. What was this guy thinking? Did he really do this to win this battle, or did he have other thoughts? There was no answer to this question, but the guy who had the answer was sitting next to her. At this moment, the driver slowly stopped the car and turned back to ask. The place where the two of them got into the car was not far from the neighborhood where Roddy lived. Even if the car took a detour to reach the entrance of the neighborhood, it would only take 5 minutes. The stuck Roddy was saved by the driver and immediately replied gratefully, "Sir, I won't get out of the car first. I want to bring a foreign friend to see our imperial city. Your girlfriend is really beautiful, just like a movie star. Why, where do you want to go? But today is the weekend, and the traffic in the city is not good." The driver in his 40s spoke with a Beijing accent, and as he spoke, he changed the order on the screen of the driving computer. Roddy tapped on the map on his watch, glanced at the traffic map and replied, "North 4th Street half a circle, and then go to Chang'an Street. Drive steadily, my friend is afraid of motion sickness." Okay. The car cost 300 yuan for such a circle, so the driver happily agreed. When Roddy turned his head, he found that Kardashian was lying on her side and looking at him. After driving on the main road of the 4th Ring Road, the LED street lights on both sides were extremely bright, and under the panoramic sunroof, Kardashian inadvertently highlighted her amazing curves. She held her cheek with her left hand and said with a faint smile, "Have you thought about the answer?" "There is no answer, because after my parents passed away, there has not been a woman in my house for many years." Roddy answered calmly, and desperately organized the words in his heart. "Besides, I am not a stranger to you at all. Although I lost my memory before, my mind always thinks that I can be at ease with you. So it is not surprising that I try my best to take care of you, right?" Hearing such a rhetorical question, Kardashian could not help smiling, but she did not want Roddy to see it, so she simply turned her head. "You are quite good at flowery words. Yesterday you were like a mute." There was no way Roddy could say that Akasha, Sally, and even Camilla had trained him, right? So he smiled and took out the mineral water from the central armrest, unscrewed a bottle for Kardashian, and held the other bottle for himself. "Stop asking me, how is your injury?" After all, Kardashian was still worried about him, but Roddy waved his hand. "I will be fine after a few days of rest. It's no big deal." Then he pointed out the window. "Do you see those buildings? That is Beihang, and the students who graduated from the school will participate in the airplane. The one that Sylvia studied. This is the Panga Hotel, very luxurious. Charles II Palace with gold coins is nothing compared to it. This road is the main road of the city. You can tell just from the name. Look, it's expanding in circles around the city core. The outermost circle is more than 100 kilometers away from here." Chapter 806. Kardashian did some calculations and found that even Duriel, the giant city that the Lassiman kingdom was so proud of, was at most the size of the second ring road. When Roddy shrunk the map on his watch to show the map of China and the world, Kardashian stared at the 3D globe in front of her in surprise. "Are you sure the world is spherical?" "We are sure of more things than you can imagine." Roddy opened the 3D map of the solar system. With a casual glance, the description of the 8 planets around the Sun appeared in front of the two. Kardashian's mouth was wide open. After a few glances, she lay back on the chair in disappointment. "I used to look down on humans because I thought that humans were frogs in the well. Now I realize." Roddy could understand the latter part of the sentence. However, He also understood that the humans of this world had to take a detour and pay a price in order to have such achievement. The dragons would not be able to understand that. At this point, both of them were lost in their own thoughts. The virtual world created by the space-time prison was too realistic. Roddy always felt that it was almost flawless. So he tried to chat with the driver for a while, and found that he really could not find any bugs. The car drove on the main road of the capital. The third ring road and the second ring road were too congested. The fourth ring road could be driven normally after 9 o'clock. After turning onto Chang'an Street, the two-way 10-lane parade road could be said to be smooth. When they passed by Tiananmen Square, the core of the capital, Roddy explained to her that this area had been the brain of the country for hundreds of years. Is this where the cabinet is located? More or less, but there are a lot more people. What's the use of such a big square? There are too many people, it's too crowded. Crowded? Everyone in Yveltal won't be crowded here, right? Kardashian sighed as she looked at the empty square outside the Forbidden City. Roddy shook his head and said, "There are nearly 40 million people in this city. A slightly larger neighborhood has hundreds of thousands of people. It's incomparable." His words made Kardashian a little discouraged and silent. 2 days ago she was curious about this place, but after listening to so much data and seeing the vast solar system and universe, she felt like a country bumpkin and felt powerless. Odysseus returned to the entrance of the residential area where Roddy lived. After paying, Roddy, who wanted to get off the car, realized that he still couldn't walk alone. Kardashian didn't say anything. She pulled his arm, put it on her shoulder, and supported him all the way home. After opening the door again, the feeling of a man and a woman standing alone in front of the porch was different from yesterday. Kardashian felt that she had been impulsive many times today, and there were always some messy thoughts surging in her mind. Roddy reached out and took out the pair of newly bought slippers for her, then slumped on the dining chair at the side. Only then did he realize that both of them hadn't mentioned the most important question. Their memories had also recovered. Both of them understood that they were in the prison of time and space, but during the nearly 2 hours in the car, they didn't think about leaving the prison of time and space. Could it be that I think it's good to live like this? Roddy swallowed his saliva. Just as he was about to get rid of this unrealistic thought, he saw Kardashian put on the slippers and reached out to take off her sweater. However, because the dragon's horns were facing backwards, the sweater directly caught on her clothes. She couldn't exert any strength in her left hand, so it was stuck on her head. Come and help. This sweater doesn't have buttons, it's weird. Kardashian wanted to take off her clothes and change the bandages. She was wearing a white t-shirt inside, so she didn't feel that there was anything wrong with taking off her sweater. However, she forgot that the t-shirt was already very short. When she raised her hands like that, a large area of her white abdomen was exposed, causing Roddy to swallow his saliva. Not to mention that there was no excess fat on her flat abdomen. Along with her breathing, the shadow of a four-pack appeared. Roddy finally understood why she was able to send the bodyguards, who were more than 100 pounds, flying with one kick. Various thoughts flashed through his mind, and he hurried to help. The sweater couldn't be taken off by force, so he could only support Kardashian's head. After reaching out his hand along the dragon's horns and moving the place where the sweater was caught, Roddy carefully opened the sleeves, allowing her to relax and pull out her left arm. Only then did he realize that there were several tears in the sleeves of the sweater, probably caused by the opponent's excessive strength during the previous fight. Roddy's heart trembled, and he realized that the two bodyguards were not ordinary. However, the most urgent task was to change Kardashian's dressing. When the blood-stained bandages were changed, neither of them spoke. Kardashian's eyes were secretly watching Roddy, and she found that when he held her arm and applied the ointment, his expression was very solemn. When wrapping the new bandages, in case he made a mistake, he put his watch next to him and reread the bandage guide. Roddy wasn't particularly good at serving people. For example, he didn't think to pour a cup of hot water for Kardashian or open a video call to divert her attention. However, he repeatedly checked whether the way he bandaged the wound was correct, and repeatedly asked Kardashian if she felt any tightness when she bent her arm. All right, you weren't so fussy before. I don't feel any pain anymore. Why are you asking so many questions? Although Kardashian was laughing at him, she didn't realize that her eyes seemed to overflow with gentleness. Try not to move and have a good rest for a few days. I'm most afraid that the wound will get infected, but it seems to be fine now. I know. This is waterproof, right? Is it okay for me to take a bath? Although it is waterproof, try not to get wet because he's here again, I know. Kardashian pretended to be impatient and got up to take a bath, but before leaving, she reached out to rub Roddy's hair. According to age, I am much older than you. Why do you talk more nonsense than my elders? Really? Although she said so, when she took her nightgown into the bathroom, she really saw herself in the mirror smiling like a flower. What's so funny? She tried to rub her mouth, but her eyes were still smiling, looking very cute. Outside the room, Roddy didn't think much, but he felt that he seemed to be a little naggy just now. When there was no one around, he finally had time to check the injuries on his body. There were serious bruises on both sides of his abdomen and arms, and a large swollen area on the side of his hip bone, which was painful to touch. He wanted to get a glass of water to drink, but found that it was too painful to walk, so he could only listen to the sound of water in the bathroom and helplessly sat back down bored. Roddy opened his Weibo again and found that his Weibo account had increased by 3,000 or 4,000. He was now a little numb to this number. He clicked on it and, as expected, saw a video of Kardashian shooting arrows in the archery hall. Although she was wearing a hood, her invincible long legs were particularly slender under the height of 178 centimeters. The two dragon horns covered by the hood on her head were not pretentious at all, but extremely cute. Even the title of the video read, "Dare to say that you can shoot arrows? The invincible beauty will show you what a master archery is." Needless to say, her side profile is invincible. It turns out that my wife is so good at archery, and so on. There were also many real, professional comments below. These people were amazed by her unprecedented archery style and incredible density. Several domestic master archery hunters that Roddy followed even came out and gave her high praise. This is the true archery of a battle formation. Compared to her, we are just like the hunters in the village, Wang Zhong said. However, archery hunting was, after all, a niche sport. These comments were only forwarded a few hundred times, but most of them were from the long Weibo post of a well-known cozer, Stable Salmon. Compared to the previous Flirty Moon, who had become famous by posting pictures of women's clothes, this cosplayer with a salted fish avatar was clearly a capable character. Roddy had only started paying attention to her because she cosplayed as a female elementalist from Earth Splitter. As an insider, Stable Salmon wrote a solid article. She deduced the specific data of Kardashian's height, body shape, and appearance from more than 10 photos at the archery hall, and proved that Kardashian was the protagonist of yesterday's Universe's Strongest Cosplay live broadcast. I have said so much at the beginning. In fact, what I want to say the most is, I've seen such a perfect woman and turned gay, okay? Looking for her contact information / peachheart eyes. This post was forwarded by many people, and some people also mentioned him, but Roddy could not find these Weibo posts. Occasionally, he would find some, but no one mentioned that he was at the scene. Roddy felt a little strange. He wondered if Kardashian was so dazzling that no one noticed him at all. But then he realized that it might have something to do with Zhao Hongwen, who had bodyguards with him. He changed the keywords and found some clues from a few screenshots that had not been completely deleted. It turned out that many people had taken pictures of the scene of his competition with Zhao Hongwen, but not long after they were posted on Weibo, they were completely deleted. Obviously, the relevant departments behind the scenes had informed them. Roddy thought for a while, closed Weibo, and opened a web browser to search for everything related to Zhao Hongwen. The results were basically 404 or, "This page has been deleted according to laws and regulations." Roddy's brows furrowed deeper and deeper. Thinking of the two powerful bodyguards, he had a bad feeling in his heart. He switched to the page and went on the internet. Only then did he figure out who the other party was. The probability of winning a 5 million lottery is higher than this. As the Prime Minister of the Cabinet, the Mayor of Elson City, and a person who had killed countless people, Sir Roddy breathed a sigh of helplessness. Although this was a space-time prison, and everything was illusory, Roddy understood one thing. If he could not find the exit, he could only be locked here forever. And if he wanted to get out, the first thing he needed to do was to abide by the rules here. The city had its rules, and he and Kardashian did not have the personal strength of 100 or even 1,000 in the other world. To put it bluntly, even if he and Kardashian were strong in fighting, could they beat the Special Police Force? How could they provoke this kind of fourth-generation Red Army just by shooting an arrow? After a moment of depression, Roddy immediately realized that this was not necessarily a coincidence. After all, although the space-time prison was an illusory product, its purpose was to imprison him. In other words, everything went smoothly in this place, which was probably a rare thing. He looked at the English information on the wall with a gloomy expression. Just as he was thinking, the bathroom door suddenly opened. He instinctively glanced at it, but he immediately turned his head back because of the blood rushing to his head. Kardashian walked out in a silk nightgown, her hair wet, her left arm hanging by her side was covered in white bandages, and her right hand was touching the dragon horn with a troubled expression. Obviously, she had not bathed in this form before, and a lot of her hair was hanging on it, tangled together. Seriously speaking, her nightgown was not a sexy style, but she was too tall. The skirt, which originally reached her knees, now barely covered half of her thighs. Although she was wearing underwear, this kind of light lace underwear without steel braces pushed up the nightgown in front of her chest. Roddy did not have a preference for legs, breasts, or beauty, but from his aesthetic point of view, Kardashian's long legs were indeed the most perfect he had ever seen in his life. Although Marinsara's body proportions were excellent, the shadow dragon was much shorter, and the visual impact was not comparable to Kardashian's. Wait, why did he drag Marinsara into this? Roddy looked at the screen full of English information in front of him, and once this strange thought appeared in his mind, it became a little difficult to control. Marinsara's sometimes cold and sometimes mischievous attitude appeared in his mind. She regarded him as her only friend, and he regarded her as a comrade whom he could entrust his life to. Thinking of her, Roddy would think of her always confident sunny smile. Marinsara, who had left her identity as a dragon's and started from scratch, had great perseverance and determination that Roddy could never reach. As for Kardashian, at first, Roddy thought she was an aloof goddess, but after getting to know her, he did not expect her to be a princess who was insensitive. She just happened to be ridiculously strong. She was smart, but sometimes she could be stupid. But when it came to an emergency, her intelligence would come online in time. Roddy tried his best to please her in order to build a good relationship with the Frost Dragon race, but he did not expect to get a cheap sister just like that. If he did not call her sister, she would not be happy. This was really a bit of a dilemma. As his thoughts began to wander, Roddy's gaze became a little unfocused. When he came back to his senses, he realized that Kardashian was already sitting beside him with her back facing him. "What are you thinking about? Help me move my hair away, these dragon horns are so annoying." Oh, okay." Roddy quickly raised his hand to move her hair away. He was afraid that he would hurt her, so he carefully moved closer to observe. This way, he could naturally smell that fresh body fragrance. Roddy was sure that this was not the smell of shower gel. There was really no such thing as the fragrance of a woman's body. Wait, why was he thinking about that? Distracted was indeed Roddy's current state. Although he tried his best not to look around, he could still catch a glimpse of her smooth shoulders and flawless back from the corner of his eyes. A stunner was a stunner, no matter which angle he looked at it from. Chapter 807. Kardashian's long hair was very smooth, so Roddy quickly smoothed it out. But he soon realized that this dragons might not have washed their hair. At this time, her hair was not dry and was even dripping water. So he said, "Let me help you dry it and blow-dry it. Otherwise, it's not good for your hair when you sleep." Dragons did not have the concept of whether their hair was good or not, but Kardashian really enjoyed the feeling of being served by Roddy. She pretended to be carefree and said no. It was not until Roddy mentioned it several times that she finally agreed with an expression of, "I really don't know what to do with you." In order to take care of Cripple, she took a towel and a hairdryer under Roddy's reminder. She naturally leaned back in the chair and relaxed with her back facing him. Her grayish-white hair was like silk in his hands. After blowing it dry, there were no signs of split ends. Roddy was very serious. Blowing his hair meant blowing his hair. Those unrealistic thoughts in his mind had disappeared. When the noise of the hairdryer stopped, Roddy began to seriously think about how to leave the space-time prison. "Sister, that we have been in this space-time prison for 2 days, you see." But before he finished speaking, Kardashian suddenly got up and said, "My hair is indeed much more comfortable like this. My head hurts from the fight today. I want to rest early. If there's anything else, let's talk about it tomorrow." The young lady did not care about Roddy's expression. She went straight back to the bedroom and closed the door, leaving Roddy standing there with a puzzled face. Was she really too sleepy? Or did he misunderstand something? Roddy scratched his head and still could not figure out the main point. He wanted to lie down on the bed, but found that there was no one to help him. After a long time, he found a mop to mop the floor and used it as a crutch to support himself back to the room. In this situation, he was too lazy to wash his face and brush his teeth. After lying down, he quickly fell asleep. Of course, he did not know that Kardashian, who was known as a headache, was staring at the ceiling next door. She whispered sadly, "Why do we have to go out? Isn't this good?" 3 days had passed, but Edith, who was in the core room, did not see Roddy, who had escaped from prison. This made the group of people who came to ask every day return in disappointment. Edith could understand their feelings, but she did not have much hope for it. The punishment of the third time-space prison was so severe that even she, as the creator of the array, didn't want to experience it. The time-space prison array itself was a super-array that transcended time and space. Its stability was questionable, and it was a controversial existence back then. This was because its creation was beyond the High Elves' understanding. It was as uncontrollable as nuclear fission. Therefore, the rescue plan was also a risk for Edith, who had excellent theoretical knowledge. The preparation of the magic circle was time-consuming, because this kind of complicated space-time magic circle needed constant correction and debugging, and the energy consumed was also astronomical. Even though Elson City had survived the energy crisis, it did not have many crystals at this time. At most, it was only enough for Edith to activate it twice. If the 2 searches failed, she could only resign herself to fate. "It is indeed troublesome without a body," the Grand Arcanist also sighed helplessly. Edith, who once had the power of a demigod, looked at the reflection on the crystal wall. After a moment of absent-mindedness, she waved her hand and changed the contents of the crystal wall to the scene outside the tower. At this time, the magic tower had moved. In order to prevent the other Frost Dragon race from discovering the Hersino Magic Tower, Edith had to move the Magic Tower to the forest 5 miles outside the city. The Magic Tower's energy was currently stable. After the magic circle was activated, even Lord Victor would not be able to detect its existence unless he cast a special spell to search for it. However, the powerful mobility and hiding ability of the Hersino Magic Tower and Edith's own power were too amazing. Even if Camilla chose to believe her, the cabinet was not willing to easily hand over the astonishingly valuable recharged crystals to someone of unknown origin, holding a powerful weapon and not of the same camp. In other words, the IFTA forces did not completely trust Edith. However, the solution was simple. Camilla, the Guardian, represented Lord Roddy and signed a magic contract with Edith, which stipulated the use of the recharged crystals, Edith's duties in this plan, and other details. This kind of contract was not polite. In fact, it was a clear statement that, "I don't trust you." Camilla herself was against this contract, but the cabinet firmly believed that this contract was necessary. And who was behind the cabinet? In fact, everyone knew that it was Sally Duke. From a personal point of view, Sally had a very good impression of Edith. After a few conversations, the Grand Arcanist's knowledge and wisdom even made her feel that there was an unreachable gap between them. The probability of such a person going back on her word was very small. But a person was a person, and business was business. After becoming Duke, Sally became more aware of this. So, she ignored Camilla and Akasha's dissuasion and directly put the contract in front of Edith in the name of the cabinet. On the other hand, the wise Edith didn't need Camilla's explanation at all. She signed the contract happily. It was not only her own character that made her sign this contract, but also more complicated factors in various aspects. For example, she knew that her current state was only a castle in the air. Without a physical body, she could not do anything outside the magic tower. As a foreign race from the era of the High Elves, she was actually at a loss. Her greatest enemy, the ancient sea monster, had been destroyed by Roddy. The reason that supported the existence of her soul for 700 years had disappeared. What should she do now? Revive her physical body? Take revenge on the demons? Study more complicated planes? Edith had considered these 3 ideas, and it was obvious that these 3 goals were related to the Witcher, Roddy. These days, she had also heard everything about Roddy from the 3 women. The more she understood, the more puzzled she became. An ordinary scout managed to reach this level in just a few years? She looked at the image of Elson City on the crystal wall, puzzled. This city was built by Khadgar. With the foundation of the Grand Arcanist, even if the city was controlled by a pig, it could still easily surpass the simple cities of the current human civilization in all aspects. However, when she noticed the extra things in Elson City, she found that things were not as simple as she thought. The roads outside the city, the train tracks, and the experimental plane that flew out of the Pasha Magic Tower from time to time were somewhat beyond her imagination. Flat roads also existed in the era of the High Elves, but they were only used by the carriages of the ruling class. They were not used by the commoners at all. Although the High Elves civilization was much more advanced than today's humans, the lives of most of the commoners were not as good as those in Elson City. The train was actually a variant of the transport ship. Looking at its scope of application, the transport ship, that only laid tracks in the city, was originally only used for military purposes. It had nothing to do with the commoners. As for the plane, it was completely unheard of. After the creation of the floating space tower, it became the trump card of the high-level arcanists. Its main purpose was agricultural irrigation and war. However, no one had thought of creating an aircraft that could escape from the magic circle. After all, the high-level arcanists themselves had the ability to fly. If they wanted to fly, they just had to work hard to advance. However, in Elson, these 3 things seemed to be prepared for the commoners. This difference did not sound big, but Edith knew that for a civilization, it meant two completely different results. In the current world, no one knew that Edith's life experience should be the standard example of a commoner's counterattack. Existences like Khadgar, who had a thunderous reputation, were all supported by large families that had been operating for hundreds of years. After all, the cultivation of an arcanist basically depended on a pile of money. Hard work alone was useless. It was very likely that the results of your hard work for most of your life were already there at birth for some people. The solidification of the social class was an eternal characteristic of every civilization. If the ruling class was compared to a castle, then the only thing that the people in the castle wanted to do was to strengthen their position and control the ticket to enter the city. This was to prevent more people from sharing their profit. When Edith was born, she could only be considered a small village girl born outside the castle. However, there were shortcuts to enter the castle. Beauty was one of them. Because of her stunning beauty, she was able to enter the circle of the castle. Using her extraordinary intelligence, she traveled among the various powers. There were indeed many high elf nobles who wanted to take her for themselves. However, before they could fight for a winner, Edith herself had become a high-level arcanist through hard work and talent. This concept was similar to the ancient scholars who took the imperial examination to become a grand scholar. It could be said that it was like a carp leaping through the dragon's gate. Her stunning beauty, which had always attracted trouble, became a protective charm. Because she was lucky enough to be accepted by the high elf royal family, she became a high-level arcanist supported by the royal family. Within 30 years, she successfully crossed the threshold of the Grand Arcanist and became one of the pillars of the kingdom. This legendary experience was now a thing of the past for Edith. She gained not only power, but also a comprehensive view of the high elf civilization. When she left the ordinary high elf and became a demigod who looked down on all beings, her understanding of the race had risen to another level. So now, the new things in Elson City were mostly the mayor's whimsical attempts in the eyes of others. But Edith saw a kind of gap in civilization in the eyes of others. There was one thing that innovation could be attributed to a person's genius idea. However, if a person could create a large number of feasible and mature ideas in a short period of time, it was definitely abnormal. Others might have had the same idea, but first of all, their vision was not broad enough, and second, they could not accurately predict the consequences of Roddy's actions. In the end, they left it unsettled. However, Edith's eyes were enough to see through the fog and went straight to the essence of the problem. A border scout who could only eat and wait for death had lived like a useless person before, but in the past 3 years, he had made a name for himself. This was not unprecedented in history. However, if he not only changed the fate of the country, but also accelerated the development of human civilization with his own efforts, that itself became a suspicious point. "Who are you?" Edith's eyes stopped on the confinement ball that she used to communicate with Roddy, and her eyes became deep. Beep. The microwave beeped, and Roddy took out the heated milk. He placed it under the capsule coffee machine and pressed the button. The mildly roasted coffee gave off a mellow aroma, and the amber-colored oil spread out on the surface of the milk, forming an ever-changing pattern. This method was naturally different from the coffee shops outside. Roddy was too lazy to make the milk. He stirred it with a spoon, added some brown sugar, and brought the cup to the table. In front of him, Kardashian rested her chin on her right hand and looked at him. She said aloud, "No wonder I always felt uncomfortable when I came to the mansion in Elson City. Now that I think about it, it turns out that you have too few servants there." "Too few?" Roddy casually turned on the projector. The news page of Earthbreaker had the title Guide to the Silent Forest, How to Deal with the Wood Elves 3. He could not help but laugh as he clicked on it. He found that the wood elf on the cover was the village chief, Brody, and the illustration below was the ranger mentor, Natha. He could not help but feel that it was a lifetime ago. You are a great lord with a lot of wealth. When others have your status and wealth, they can't wait to be carried by servants. But sometimes you have to cook for Akasha herself. Only now do I understand that you have always lived by yourself. There is no one to take care of you. This made Roddy nod helplessly. But before he could say anything else, Kardashian pointed at the words on the wall and asked, "Isn't the silent forest next to Hollier City? You experienced a lot of things there, right?" This wood elf looks familiar. Oh, isn't this Natha? Roddy felt that she was a little strange. He did not see her always interrupting him. He looked away from the guide and decided to go straight to the point. Yes, it is Natha. But this is also the problem. Sister, I want to discuss with you in detail how to get out of this space-time prison. After saying this, Kardashian seemed to collapse and mumbled something. Roddy could not understand her state at all. He asked, did I say something wrong? It's nothing. I just have no idea how to get out of here. Chapter 808. The problem now is that I don't know what condition I should fulfill. Roddy took a bite of the bread. The first time we entered, it was because you cast a dagger and the key that came out was the test in my memory. This time, do we need to find something in this world that you remember? No, when we entered this world, you used the wings of the ice dragon and I used the magician's hand, which means that both of us broke the rules. Maybe we need to fulfill two conditions. Kardashian had been thinking about this for the whole night. She turned her eyes to the wall. But if there's something I'm familiar with, I want to ask, why does this Earthbreaker look exactly the same as the place we came from? This was actually the biggest problem, and it was also one of the things that Roddy found the most difficult to explain. But in order to leave the prison of time and space, he decided not to hide anything and told her the truth. In fact, Earthbreaker is a game developed by a game company on Earth. The process of transmigration was not complicated, but the explanation of Earth was something that was difficult to explain. The two talked as they ate. After dinner, Roddy went to make a pot of tea and brought a pen and paper to continue explaining. After about 2 hours, Kardashian finally had a basic understanding of this world. According to what you said, even my existence seems to be fake? Kardashian did not show any expression of being subverted. She looked indifferent and her mind was racing. Because they were on different sides, she would not doubt the world she lived in. In other words, if Roddy could think that the world she lived in was fake, then Kardashian could also think that the Earth that Roddy lived in was fake. Didn't the facts prove one point? The world that Roddy could not find a flaw in was created by the prison of time and space. Then who could be sure that the world that Roddy lived in was not an illusion created by another civilization? The more he thought about it, the more panicked he became. Roddy couldn't help but shiver. I don't understand what's going on either, but since you're standing in front of me and talking to me, I naturally can't say that you're fake. His words sounded helpless, but the discussion about whether the world was real or fake gave him a breakthrough point. Oh right, I haven't logged into the game since I came to the spacetime prison. The biggest difference between us is that we come from different worlds, and Earthbreaker should be one of the bridges. As he spoke, he walked to the gaming cabin in his bedroom. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he was. However, when he picked up the gaming helmet, he suddenly froze and put it down. What happened? Kardashian, who followed them in, was a little curious. Roddy pondered for a moment with a dignified expression and said, "No, the two groups of people we dealt with yesterday might be a little troublesome. Didn't they fail to follow us? What is there to worry about now?" As she spoke, she walked to the bedroom window and stretched. There was no wind today, but because of the strong wind yesterday, they could still see the blue sky. Kardashian reached out to tuck her long gray hair behind her ear and casually sat on Roddy's bed. Why? Do you think they'll find us if we hide here? This world is different. It's easy for people like me, who don't have any power, to track us down. Although Roddy was an otaku, otaku also meant that he spent a lot of time online. He read a lot and had a basic understanding of most of the world's information. Therefore, he was very clear that if someone like Zhao Hongwen wanted to investigate him, he could basically do it with just a word. The people on Weibo already know my account. If I log into the game, it's very easy for them to track my login location. Roddy felt a little headache, and his words sounded like he was talking to himself. It's not that I can't use a proxy IP address, but those paparazzi seem to know where I live. This is more troublesome. It's not safe here? Then let's go out? I'm quite curious about how big this space-time prison is. Kardashian, on the other hand, was not as depressed as Roddy. As she spoke, her eyes lit up. She was not used to staying at home all day. If she could go out with this guy to see the strange and interesting world, she would be more than happy. Going out is not easy. You don't have an ID, let alone a passport. Even if you want to fake it, there's no way. Trains, planes, and even long-distance buses now required an ID to buy a ticket. Otherwise, they would not even be able to enter the station. Roddy was not a gangster with a wide network of friends. He was really helpless in this kind of problem. Perhaps a student ID could make do with the kind of ID that could be obtained from a telephone pole on the street, but a passport was impossible. Drive by myself? Roddy's parents had left him a Toyota Camry. He also had a driver's license, and his parents had taken it out for a self-driving trip before. But after his parents passed away, the car was basically left in the parking lot of the neighborhood to collect dust. It was used less than 10 times a year, just to prevent the battery from running out of power. This sounded like a good idea. After all, no matter how powerful Zhao Hongwen was, he probably would not use the state machinery to surround him for a woman. This kind of rich man could use his connections to get help from the police system, but it was too exaggerated to want to track him like a case. After all, sometimes the so-called anti-tracking, to a large extent, was to increase the other party's tracking cost and eventually force them to give up. Roddy seriously thought about the feasibility of this, and unknowingly became a little lost in thought. Kardashian did not know what he was thinking. Sitting on Roddy's bed, she was curiously looking around. Yesterday morning, she pinched Roddy's nose and scared him half to death. She was so busy apologizing that she did not have time to see what else was in the room. At this moment, looking around, the bedroom was clean and tidy, but a commemorative painting of Earth splitting, hung on the wall, made her eyes narrow. The style of this painting was a little rough, even clumsy. It was more similar to the religious themes of the early Middle Ages in Europe. The figures of people, elves, dwarves, and dragons in the painting were not exquisite, and some places were even large pieces of blurred paint, making it difficult to distinguish the details. But the theme was very clear. Various races surrounded a beam of light in the center of the painting, and this light fell from the sky, representing the god of Earth splitting. As for which god? Roddy had searched for information before, and there were many opinions on the internet, but most people pointed to Goddess Si-Chi, the god often mentioned by the people of the Kingdom of Karen. Staring at the oil painting for a while, Kardashian finally asked, "Where did this painting come from?" Roddy was thinking about the key points of driving out, so he glanced at the oil painting and replied without thinking much, This oil painting, it was a gift when I bought the game capsule. This thing is 3D printed, so it looks like a real oil painting, but it is not a real painting. In this day and age, 3D printing was very cheap. A game capsule cost more than 10,000 yuan, so giving a fake oil painting as a souvenir was just a gimmick. But Kardashian's voice was much more solemn. "I know it is a fake because I have seen the real one." "You have seen what?" Roddy was stunned, and his eyes also looked at the oil painting. Where have I seen it? Is it exactly the same? This is not a human painting. It should be from a civilization that is older than the High Elves. It is placed in the main palace of Katas. That is where all the dragons open when they make important decisions. It is also known as the Temple of the Gods. With my strength, I cannot enter the core of the Temple of the Gods. Every time, only demigod lords or others are qualified to enter. This is a secret that most of the members of the dragons do not know. I went there once with my father, and this painting was placed in the corridor of the palace. It is said to be an ancient painting from the era of the god. It was collected by the Green Dragon Lords many generations ago. This made Roddy realize the seriousness of the problem. He frowned and asked, "Lord Victor knows the meaning of that light?" Kardashian squinted her eyes as she recalled what her father had said. There are only demigods on the continent now, and there are no real gods. That beam of light belonged to a god in the early days. He was called Corsius, but the language at that time was not perfect. After several civilizations recorded it, the name kept losing its authenticity. So far, it has become Siki in the human's mouth. It seemed that the player's judgment of the light was correct. In Roddy's memory, many people shouted, "Goddess Siki above," and such. However, he was not confused about the content of the painting. Instead, he was confused about why this painting became a collector's edition commemorative accessory. The world of Earthbreaker was too big. Due to the use of the quantum computer, every detail in the game was far more detailed than any other MMORPG. This was also the main reason why the game was so popular. However, Katas was obviously not a place that players could come into contact with. Only the dragons knew about the existence of this painting. So why did the game company pick this painting from such a remote place? Who would dare to say that this was a coincidence? For a moment, Roddy had doubts about the game itself. He only knew that it was developed by a large multinational corporation. It was said that there were tens of thousands of people in the design team, and the production time was more than 6 years. Not to mention the details that no one would pay attention to, the languages of the different races in Earthbreaker formed their own system. One had to know that until now, no game company had specially developed a language just to suit the characters in the game. Tolkien had spent decades writing the Elvish language of Lord of the Rings. How could a game come up with 7 or 8 languages in 6 years? Moreover, they were not even from the same language family. The differences were obvious. Chapter 809. Roddy stared at the painting in a daze, but Kardashian had already turned her gaze elsewhere. She got up out of boredom and walked to the bookshelf a few steps away. Her fingertips skimmed through the books. These books represented all of Roddy's hobbies since he was young. At first, there were all kinds of encyclopedias, followed by tank and airplane military illustrations, and then there were all kinds of game magazines and guides. Of course, there were also graphic novels and must-read classics like Romance of the Three Kingdoms. But as Kardashian looked at it, her eyes narrowed. She reached out and pulled out a large picture album. What's written here? She found that the words in the book looked like Chinese characters, but she couldn't understand them. Turning it over, the cover was a beautiful girl wearing a cool swimsuit. Her sexy figure and seductive expression immediately made Kardashian's eyebrows slightly raised. Opening to the first few pages, Kardashian found that the pictures inside were even more outrageous. There were maid costumes, nurse costumes, office uniforms, and often the heroine wearing these clothes had a lustful look on her face, doing all kinds of strange actions. Kardashian swallowed her saliva, suddenly felt a little dry. But before she could flip a few more pages, Roddy suddenly reached out and closed the book with a "paw" sound. With a face full of embarrassment, he said, This is a picture album. I bought the game a long time ago. Give it to me." Kardashian's almond-shaped eyes stared at Roddy, but he didn't give in like before. He was still injured and rushed over to endure the pain. But no matter how painful it was, he didn't dare to let this Missy continue to read. That picture album was a comic Roddy bought. Unfortunately, it was an R18 rated product bought from a Japanese shopping agent. Needless to say, the standard was naturally not to mention what secret is there in this book? Kardashian couldn't use strength in her left hand, but her right hand held on tightly. Roddy's strength wasn't as strong as hers, so he couldn't snatch it away even if he gritted his teeth. Finally, he had to shout, "Sister, I beg you, this really isn't something important, it's just a picture album. Do you think I'm stupid?" As soon as she finished speaking, Kardashian loosened her grip. Roddy's legs were not agile, so he was caught off guard and took a few steps back. He sat back on the bed awkwardly. Just as he was about to grab the album in his hand, he felt a blur in front of him. His wrist was cut by Kardashian's knife hand. Although he didn't feel any pain, his entire right hand went numb. The album fell, but she caught it firmly. Roddy did not give up. He felt that Kardashian's left hand was not nimble, so he still had the strength to fight. So, he wanted to reach with his left hand. Unexpectedly, just as he stretched out his arm, he saw Kardashian suddenly jump up, raised her knee, and fiercely hit him. Is there a need to? This scared Roddy. He didn't know if this miss was serious. If she really used strength, his sternum might not be able to bear it. So, he immediately leaned back and fell on the bed. As soon as his head touched the mattress, Kardashian directly rode on his chest. Roddy groaned and opened his eyes. Only then did he find that she held back. Otherwise, it should be her knee pressing on his chest. Kardashian only wanted to scare him. Now that Roddy's arms were supported by her knees, he looked much more obedient. She grabbed the album with her right hand, and her left hand made a gesture to choke Roddy's neck. She said fiercely, "You actually learned to rob? Are you going to rebel?" Roddy really couldn't move. Kardashian's long legs were full of strength, pressing his two arms tightly. He wanted to lower his head to speak, but in his vision was the arm wrapped in white bandages. He was afraid that Kardashian's wound would open again, so he didn't even dare to struggle. He immediately begged for mercy. "Sister, I was wrong. I won't do it again. TSK, how can you be a city lord like this? Just be my lackey." Kardashian looked at him like this, and her heart was actually very happy. But joking still had to have a sense of propriety, so she let go of her left hand. But in order to prevent him from robbing the album again, she directly sat on his chest and flipped through the album. This made Roddy feel even more tormented. Not to mention that the R18 album he bought was flipped in front of him. Kardashian was wearing a cute beautiful girl's pajamas on top of his body, and the posture was so ambiguous. It really made his blood boil, and it was difficult to resist. Especially in his field of vision, he could still see the 2D girl on the cover of the album smiling at him. On the cover, it was written in Japanese, "Artist Shuang Shue's new work, My Little Secret with My Cousin." Sigh, this was probably the most embarrassing scene in his life. The two stayed on the bed in this strange posture for a few minutes. Kardashian's movement of flipping through the album was getting slower and slower. Roddy wanted to speak several times, but he swallowed it back when he saw her murderous eyes. In the end, Kardashian didn't ride Roddy to finish reading this unsightly album. Instead, she slammed the book shut, climbed down from the bed with a sullen face, and silently walked out of the house. "Sister, you pervert!" Without waiting for Roddy to explain anything, Kardashian snorted outside the door, and then turned into the bedroom where she lived. However, as soon as she came in, her legs were a little weak, and she leaned against the door. "This pervert! Pervert! Pervert!" She gritted her teeth and cursed in a low voice, but she didn't know that her face was already red. Dragons were knowledgeable. She naturally knew about the things between human men and women, but knowing was knowing, she had never experienced it herself. Not to mention that the information she read were all words, even if there were pictures, they were simple and even ugly. How could it be compared to the exquisite and realistic picture in the album in her hand? Kardashian wasn't Basta. That guy who liked to make others wear green hats had already experienced hundreds of battles, and she was really rich in theoretical knowledge, but actual combat experience was zero. This kind of R18 album may not be taken seriously by modern people, but for Kardashian, the visual impact was a little too big. She felt that the album in her hand was a little hot. Just now, she wanted to throw it directly at Roddy's chest and let this bastard taste some pain, but why did she take it? Yes, I did it to stop that guy from continuing to fall. Kardashian thought like this, and finally had a reliable reason in her heart. But her right hand uncontrollably opened the album, and she continued to read the content just now with a red face. What if I can't understand Japanese? Who cares? Can't I understand what it means by looking at the picture? On the other side, Roddy naturally didn't know what this young lady was thinking. He just felt that today's matter had made his life gloomy. It was not a big deal for an otaku to buy a few pornographic albums, but it was really depressing to be scolded as a pervert because of this. Speaking of which, as a dignified city lord and cabinet prime minister, he was so despised because of a pornographic book. He really had no face to live in the world. He also didn't know why the young lady next door ran away. This matter was actually not big, but if she ran away, it was probably useless for him to knock on the door, so it was better to hurry up and get down to business. Roddy adjusted his mood, took a pen and paper, and recorded the content of the painting on the wall that Kardashian had just said. Then he began to make a preparation list for the anti-tracking plan. He wasn't sure how much time he had to prepare, but everything should be done as soon as possible. The alarm clock on his watch just happened to ring at this moment, and it showed 7:00 in the morning. Obviously, the appearance of Kardashian had completely disrupted Roddy's life. At 9:00 in the morning, Zhao Hongwen woke up from the soft big bed. Among the group of young masters, his private life was definitely not chaotic. After all, his family mainly focused on politics, and most of the people who made money in business were his collateral relative. At this level, being overly ostentatious and extravagant was stupid. Therefore, in Zhao Hongwen's bedroom, there were no exaggerated scenes that were commonly seen in Mary Sue novels. There were no expensive and extravagant decorations, and there were no gold and silver decorations. This looked like an ordinary Chinese-style room. Although the style of the solid wood furniture from the Ming and Qing dynasties looked very exquisite, it was incompatible with the other modern appliances in the room. This actually reflected the generation gap between Zhao Hongwen and the previous two generations. The pillars of the Red family generally had not developed any real aesthetic standards, and even if the descendants of the Red family who went abroad to study had developed aesthetic standards, they often did not have the right to make any comments on the decoration of the government-allocated housing. Therefore, every time he saw the red furniture in front of him, Zhao Hongwen felt a little helpless. The more powerful one was, the more they knew to keep a low profile in the capital. There were many big shots who fell from power because of their children's ostentatious behavior, so the Zhao family did not do anything stupid like buying a detached villa in the center of the capital. At this time, the place where Zhao Hongwen was living was the standard family compound, the kind where the armed police stood guard at the door. He was tortured by Roddy last night, so he was naturally not in a good mood. After leaving 2 bodyguards to investigate, he asked the driver to take him to the private bar where he usually drank. There were all kinds of people in young Master Zhao's circle, but today he did not want to listen to those people brag and force him to come up with bad ideas. Zhao Hongwen admitted in his heart that he was really stunned by Kardashian, so much so that when he was drinking at the bar, he could almost see her beautiful face when he closed his eyes. He drank on and off until the wee hours of the morning, but he did not receive a reply from the bodyguards. He felt that he was too impatient and was a little obsessed, so he went home and fell asleep. Now that he woke up, the first thing he did was to pick up his watch, wanting to see the results of the bodyguard's investigation. However, after looking through it for a long time, he only saw various invitations from the circle for meals. "What's going on?" he muttered, got up and changed his clothes. When he came out, he saw his father sitting in the dining room, reading the newspaper. "Dad? Why are you here?" At this time, Zhao Hongwen suddenly felt that something was wrong. His father was of high status and power, and would not have the time to visit him. But at this time, Zhao Hongwen did not dare to be the slightest presumptuous, and respectfully sat down. This house was Zhao Hongwen's own house, and no one came here except for the housekeeper and servants who took care of his daily life. He realized that there was a problem, but looking at his father's serious face, he did not dare to ask more. His father's face was gloomy, and he looked up from the newspaper. "Did they fight with someone yesterday?" People from the police station and the Internet Surveillance Bureau all told me that Xiao Wang and Xiao Li are now in the hospital. Ah! Zhao Hongwen was a little confused by the question. 7 or 8 years ago, he did get into trouble several times. Who didn't go to the bar and nightclub at night without some conflicts? But later, as he grew older, he became much calmer, so now that he was asked like this, he was a little confused. "Why are they in the hospital?" "I didn't ask them to fight." Seeing that his father's face was not right, he told him what happened yesterday in detail. The latter's face became a little better, and he said in a low voice, "If you want to chase a woman, just chase a woman. What's the use of such tricks? This matter will be temporarily suppressed, and the rest is up to you." The pillar of the Zhao family was naturally the old man who had not retired yet. He still had a long way to go, so at this time, he had to cherish his own feathers. In other words, he should avoid trouble if he could. Zhao Hongwen naturally understood his words, but he did not show the shock and confusion in his heart. After sending his father off respectfully, he quickly went out and asked the driver to send him to the hospital. After seeing the 2 dejected bodyguards wrapped in bandages, he finally understood the truth of the matter. "That woman is stronger than you too?" "Young master, to be honest, if not for her injured left hand, the 2 of us probably wouldn't have lasted more than 3 rounds. Wang Li, whose chest had been diagnosed with a fracture, found it difficult to speak. After panting for a long time, he continued, "That man is not worth mentioning, but that woman is too strong and too fast. If she hadn't held back, I'm afraid she would have killed me on the spot. I've seen this kind of guy in the old Russian army. They all crawled out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, but a woman can also do this, I can't imagine." As he spoke, he rolled up his sleeve. Zhao Hongwen was shocked by the exaggerated bruises on his arm. In the past, he had also made a fuss about learning from the other party, but after a few punches and kicks were blocked, he almost died from the pain, but the other party did not even leave a mark. But now, it seemed that even Zhao Hongwen believed that it was a bear who fought with him last night. The short Li Chongkai next to him was even more exaggerated. His right arm was wrapped in a polymer fiber bandage, because Kardashian had directly broken it. Seeing this situation, Zhao Hongwen's resentment towards them disappeared without a trace. He said directly, "Rest well, I didn't consider this matter thoroughly." He had long passed the age of being willful and mischievous, and had his own way of doing things. He ordered his butler to give each of the 2 bodyguards a hard work of 100,000 yuan, which could be considered as a further step to buy their loyalty. On the other hand, he did not forget to send a message to a few of his friends in his contact list. With his father's words in the morning, he knew that he could not continue to cause trouble in public, but it was not difficult to continue to investigate in private. In their circle, it was a piece of cake to introduce a reliable, private detective. Zhao Hongwen kept sending messages to those friends who had connections as he walked. When he arrived in front of his A8, he suddenly stopped. He looked up, frowned, and asked the driver who opened the door, "What did you say?" Young master, I didn't say anything." The driver looked puzzled. "Really?" Chapter 810. When Mr. Zhao made up his mind, Wang Onli, who had already stepped into the company, rubbed his head in a daze. He had been on the phone since the morning. After all, he still had business to do in addition to pimping his friends, but he always felt that he had forgotten something. After arriving at his manager's office, he took a sip of coffee from his secretary. His eyes stayed on the other party's black stockings for a moment, but he didn't tease her like before. "CEO Wang, is there something on your mind today?" "Nothing, you go ahead." The little secretary naturally had an affair with him, but he felt that something was wrong today. After thinking about it, Wang only took out his watch and looked through the various calls from yesterday. Only then did he find that he had chat records with Mr. Zhao. What's going on? Wang only felt cold sweat oozing from his forehead because he didn't remember what he did last night. Didn't he go home after work and sleep? He looked at the pictures of the archery school ******** that he sent to Zhao Hongwen and quickly searched the internet. He was still puzzled when he saw a bunch of 404 pages and Kardashian's archery videos. However, Wang only didn't dare to call Zhao Hongwen to ask. After all, the gap between their identities was too big, and it would be too stupid to ask, "What did I do yesterday?" Wang only, who was puzzled, finally put all the questions back in his heart. If Mr. Zhao called, he would deal with it. If not, then he would pretend that nothing happened. "It seems that I need to go for a physical examination. Is there something wrong with my head?" He muttered a few words, turned on the computer, and dealt with today's business. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Roddy and Kardashian were wrapped up tightly. After looking around and confirming that no one was watching them, they quickly rushed out of the unit door and ran all the way to the community's underground parking lot. Both of them were dressed in masks, long coats, and hoods, but the haze was gradually rising today, so no one would think that there was anything wrong with their appearance. After learning the lesson of Zhao Hongwen's flirting, Kardashian understood that it was better not to be eye-catching. She tightened her windbreaker and followed closely behind Roddy, but her eyes behind the sunglasses gradually drifted away. For some reason, the scene of Roddy tying the scarf for her half an hour ago kept flashing in front of her eyes. Kardashian felt hot all over after reading the erotic book she snatched in the morning. However, she still pretended that she didn't read anything and continued to discuss countermeasures with Roddy. But when she looked at Roddy again, she always felt that some messy images would appear in her mind. He talked to her for a long time about how to countertrack them, but in the end, she only watched as Roddy's mouth opened and closed. She didn't hear a single word. Before he left, he tied the newly bought silk scarf for her. She didn't know why, but she, who had always been relaxed in front of Roddy, actually felt nervous. What was the reason? He just moved a little closer. She didn't think so much when she was riding on him in the morning. But when she recalled the position of pressing down on Roddy in the morning, Kardashian inexplicably swallowed her saliva. It was better if she didn't see the album, but after seeing it, her face was a little hot. "No, I just wanted to press him down at that time, absolutely. Sister, get in the car." Roddy's words interrupted her imagination. Kardashian quivered and looked up, only to find that she was standing next to a black car. Pressing the key, the Toyota Camry's lights flashed twice. Roddy threw his big backpack into the trunk and opened the rear door for Kardashian. There was a saying, "A Toyota that doesn't break down, but a Volkswagen that can't be repaired." This car had been in service for 7 years and had driven 100,000 kilometers. Until now, Roddy really didn't worry about anything other than maintenance. The Camry's simple interior was a consistent feature, but after so many years of modifications, sitting in the back seat was still considered comfortable. Kardashian felt a little strange and asked, "Why do you want me to sit here? Isn't it good to sit in the front?" "Because the back seat is reserved for leaders, with little vibration and spacious space. And the front passenger seat is the most dangerous position in a car accident." This was the standard answer of a science and engineering otaku, but Kardashian felt warm when she heard it. She watched Roddy sitting in the driver's seat, pressing the start button and driving the car out of the basement skillfully. She suddenly asked, "Can you make this car in Elson City?" Roddy, who was setting up the navigation, was obviously stunned. Life in Elson City was so familiar, but at this time it seemed like a lifetime had passed. However, after a moment of absent-mindedness, he replied with a smile, "Not to mention this car, it's good enough that I can make a car that doesn't fall apart. You see, this car is simple, but it's an industrial technology that has been precipitated for 50 or 60 years. Even if I have the charging crystal to save the research and development of the internal combustion engine, it's basically impossible to catch up in all aspects." "You talk too much. Then can you make a car that carries people?" "I don't want the big truck, just the one we're sitting in." "That's not a problem." Kardashian didn't say much after hearing this. She just looked out of the window with a calm face. "Okay, I want you to make one." Then she added, "Only for me." After saying this, she felt her heart beat a little faster, but she kept telling herself in her heart, "I just want this guy to make a unique gift for me. There's nothing to be nervous about." The car had left the community and was driving on the North 4th Ring Road. Roddy turned on the directional lights and entered the ring road. Unsurprisingly, he was stuck in the traffic. He seemed to be driving seriously, but his mind was a little confused, thinking about the meaning of Kardashian's words just now. In the end, Roddy didn't dare to think too much. He just thought that this lady wanted a toy that others don't have, so he adjusted his tone and replied with a smile, "No problem. Let's not talk about anything else. I'll make you the most spacious and comfortable back seat. It's definitely more comfortable than the one you sat in yesterday." "Then I won't be responsible for driving then." "Of course I'll be your driver." "Okay, then you can't go back on your word." Roddy suddenly realized that he seemed to have fallen into a trap. Originally, he just said it casually, but now it seemed that Kardashian had been waiting for this sentence. He glanced at the rearview mirror, but this small movement was noticed by Kardashian. She took off her sunglasses and stared at him with her beautiful eyes. "What? Do you want to go back on your word?" No. I just think this silk scarf is very suitable for you, sister." The atmosphere in the car fell into silence. The seemingly relaxed conversation just now always contained some subtle emotions. The wandering emotions were like the uncatchable haze in the sky, invisible but real, spreading. The traffic on the 4th Ring Road gradually moved. After Roddy turned onto the G6 highway, he stepped on the accelerator. The car's stereo connected to the Bluetooth played the latest European and American Billboard pop songs. Kardashian, who didn't belong to this world, looked at the rapidly retreating buildings on both sides of the highway, and her heart gradually calmed down. "Where are we going?" After passing the Chingha toll station at the beginning of the G6 highway, Kardashian finally asked. "Go north, first go to Chongping to buy some necessities, refuel, and then find a place to stay. Oh, by the way, don't we need to bring a weapon or something?" "It's illegal to bring a long blade here." Roddy had always been a law-abiding citizen. After staying in the capital for a long time, he had long given up the idea of carrying a weapon. Although a bow was not illegal, it would take a long time to explain to the police if they checked. Kardashian stopped talking after listening, and there was only the noise of high-speed driving in the car. However, the two of them obviously didn't realize that at the moment behind the car, there was a black Passat. The glass around the Passat was covered with a black film with extremely low light transmission, so it was impossible to see who was sitting inside from the side. But if Roddy rolled down the glass, he would definitely be able to recognize the two people in the back seat. They were the two paparazzi that he knocked out yesterday. The two of them didn't look too good at the moment. Not only did they fail to follow them yesterday, but the fact that their watches were stepped on and their cameras were deleted was simply a great humiliation to them. Unfortunately, their industry was sensitive, so there was no point in calling the police. They could only swallow this loss in silence. The nights in March in Beijing were not warm. When they woke up in the early morning, they were half dead from the cold. When they rushed back to the company, they were unsurprisingly scolded. But what they didn't expect was that the higher-ups actually continued to let them follow them and even sent another group of people to help. Achoo! The slightly fatter paparazzi, Li Nan, wiped his snot, held the cup in his hand and drank a mouthful of water. He cursed, "Damn, I have never felt so wronged before." His eyes were looking at the Camry not far ahead. His eyes were full of viciousness. The skinny Gongqing next to him still had a bruise on his face. At this time, he was still holding an ice pack on the bridge of his nose. When he heard Li Nan's words, he whispered, "Brother Li, why do you think we can continue to follow them? In the past, when we failed, didn't we just change people and deduct their salaries? You guys don't know, this time's mission was originally handled by third brother, but last night, the person was suddenly changed. It was said that the news came directly from the big boss, and all the information was reported directly to the higher-ups." The driver interrupted, and the two indignant people quietened down a little. Because the two people in the driver's seat were obviously not dressed like paparazzi. They were wearing gold chains around their necks. One had a crew cut and the other had a bald head. The weather was not warm, but they were wearing tight t-shirts. There were scary tattoos on their necks and arms. It was obvious that they were part of the underworld. The third brother, that the driver mentioned, was originally Li Nan and Gongqing's boss. The so-called big boss was naturally not the company manager of the paparazzi company, but the chairman of the group that owned entertainment and film companies, bath centers, bars, KTVs, and other industries. To be precise, the paparazzi was just a small studio under this huge group. Small characters like Li Nan and Gongqing basically only knew the big boss's name and had never seen him before. But this did not prevent them from being under the jurisdiction of the big boss. There were many industries under the big boss, and many of them were located in the gray area. Therefore, there was no shortage of underworld brothers. At this time, there was more than one car following the Camry. 3 cars took turns to approach. It was indeed a bit exaggerated. "Brother 11, there are so many people this time. Are we going to do something else?" The paparazzi and the triads were usually not on the same side, but they still had to be polite when speaking. Wang Nan had been wondering why there were 3 cars of people following them. Logically speaking, there was no need for so many strong men to secretly take photos. "We won't kill people, don't worry." The bald man called Aluo in the passenger seat smiled. "The big boss said to ensure that the photos are taken smoothly and that your work will not be disturbed, so he sent us to help. We won't interfere with anything else." His words were polite, but Li Nan looked at the scar on the side of the man's mouth and felt that it was not so simple. It was not his first day in the underworld. As a paparazzi, he was naturally sensitive to all kinds of gossip. Moreover, the 2 men in front of him were somewhat famous in the underworld. Although they were not big brothers, they were both ruthless characters with some heroic deeds. Killing people was child's play. "Don't worry, we have been training our tracking skills for many years. We won't be able to find it." The driver, nicknamed Brother 11, glanced at the rearview mirror. "Well, it's time to rotate." After saying that, He slowly slowed down and hid behind the traffic. The walkie-talkie connected to the control panel made a noise, and then it was the drivers of the other two cars talking. From the looks of it, they were indeed experienced trackers. Otherwise, they would not have noticed the Camry at the entrance of the community early in the morning. Not only did they follow Roddy's family, but they also investigated all kinds of information about Roddy's family. Therefore, Linan did not think that they practiced this in the past to secretly take photos. Maybe they even did some kidnapping and extortion cases? Sometimes people would not even report a crime. Who knew if these people had killed someone? However, with these people watching over him, he felt a little safer. He even felt some other emotions. As he was thinking, he received a notification from his watch. He glanced at it, narrowed his eyes, and leaned back in the chair. While fiddling with the camera wheel, he said to Gung Qing in a low voice, "The higher-ups have changed the task. They want photos of both of us. Take as many photos as you can." Gung Qing, who was covering her nose, frowned and looked up. "You want photos of the guy who hit us too? This time, the higher-ups have said that we can take photos secretly if we can. If we can't, we can press down and take photos." Linan had never done such a daring thing before, but now that he thought about it, he felt a thrill in his heart. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Are these people done? Don't they have anything better to do all day? Although the three cars behind them were hidden, Roddy and Kardashian were still vigilant. After coming out of the Chongping exit, it was not difficult to see these cars with ulterior motives on the narrow street. Even if they kept taking turns, they still could not escape the eyes of the two. Seeing this situation, Roddy finally could not help but curse. What do they want? Kardashian did not expect that she would cause so much trouble, and her face did not look very good. She was in a very subtle mood today. Originally, she thought that this trip would be a risk-free outing, but she did not expect that these guys would always disrupt her plans. Moreover, this feeling of being followed for the second time really touched her bottom line. Yesterday was already a warning, but the other party obviously did not take it seriously. Chapter 8:11. The one in the archery competition yesterday. You can think of him as Duke's son. If he wants to woo you, he will definitely use some unimaginable methods. The other group of people are the ones who take photos secretly. How should I put it? These people are like the rats in the slums who eavesdrop and buy information. He doesn't seem like he will interfere with your life directly, but he doesn't give you any privacy. You even want to peep and take photos when you go to the toilet. Roddy tried to explain in a way that Kardashian could understand, but he was not sure of their identities. He said hesitantly, "I can't tell which group of people are following us. Then what should we do?" Kardashian interrupted Roddy's explanation with a gloomy expression. She would never tolerate a provocation. If she had the ability to transform, Chongping City and the 13 tombs would have been destroyed by her. She was a dragon's, but she was surrounded and provoked by a group of ants. This made her feel aggrieved, and her tone carried the smell of gunpowder. Roddy, on the other hand, was a little distressed. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, thinking of countermeasures. This is the imperial capital's Chongping. Although it is outside the 6th Ring Road, the development of this place is comparable to a second-tier provincial capital in the country. The road was narrow and not smooth, but he couldn't shake them off even if he wanted to. 3 cars were following him like ghosts. He wasn't the main character of The Fast and the Furious. Who could he outrun in a 2.0L Camry even if he stepped on the accelerator? He had never considered counterattacking the people in the 3 cars. This was the imperial capital that he was familiar with. Roddy did not think that they would dare to do anything to him. No matter how arrogant they were, would they dare to hurt people on the streets of the imperial capital? At this moment, Roddy was actually thinking of himself as the weaker party. After all, without the help of magic, it was difficult for him and Kardashian to fight against so many enemies. Yesterday, they had suffered a lot from the 2 bodyguards, and now it was difficult for them to even walk. Today, if more than 10 people with similar strength came out of the 3 cars, what could they do? The car swayed on the streets of Chongping. Roddy gritted his teeth, trying to think of a countermeasure. However, he felt that no matter what he did, he would be in a passive position. His original plan was to find an Airbnb that did not require an ID to stay. Then, he would use a proxy IP to log into Earthbreaker to find the root of the problem. But what else could he do when he was stuck so closely to her? "Roddy, what are you thinking about?" Kardashian's voice came from the back seat, bringing Roddy back to his senses. He smiled helplessly and said, "I'm trying to find a way to get rid of him, but the performance of this car isn't good, so it's unlikely to succeed." "I'm asking, what are you thinking?" Kardashian suddenly raised her voice, startling Roddy. He had never seen her speak so harshly to him before, and he could not help but turn his head to look at her. Immediately, he found her face right in front of him, and their gazes were very close. "This is the space-time cage. It was not a real world. What are you thinking? The appearance of these people might be a coincidence, or it might not be a coincidence. Who knows if their existence is to stop us from leaving? Don't tell me you want to solve everything peacefully?" This long series of questions made Roddy shiver, and his forehead was instantly covered in sweat. That's right, no matter how hard he tried, he was still trapped in the space-time cage. How is this the real world? Why should I obey the rules of this world? As long as I can get out, who cares what methods I use? Kardashian's warning woke him up, and the latter looked at Roddy's pale face and finally heaved a sigh of relief. She did not want to use this method to provoke Roddy, but she just realized that she had been subtly influenced by this world. Last night, when Roddy told her to restrain herself from hurting others, she had always thought that she should listen to Roddy. But now, the anger in her heart had broken through this newly built cage. After all, she was an outsider, and it was not so easy for her to be bound by the rules of this world. I was being stubborn. What a stupid mistake. Roddy unconsciously wiped the sweat off his forehead, and his eyes swept across the rearview mirror, and his eyes narrowed. In just an instant, Kardashian felt the awe-inspiring aura that she had only felt when he was facing the Demon's Gate. "My legs are not very flexible, but my upper limbs can be used. Sister, how are you feeling now? It might be better if I have an arm guard on my left hand." "Okay," Roddy responded, then turned on the voice assistant on his watch and said, "Search the hunter's cabin." Could he have found something? Li Nan, who was in the car behind, looked a little serious because the Camry in front suddenly began to speed up, but Brother 11, who was driving, laughed and said, "So what if he found something? Do you think 3 cars can lose him?" As he said that, he suddenly picked up the walkie-talkie next to him and said, "The target has stopped. I will go around from the side. Follow me." Got it, got it." While they were talking, Li Nan and Gung Qing had already picked up the telephoto SLR in their hands and pointed it out of the car window. They saw that Roddy had parked the car by the side of the road, and casually got out of the car and walked to the ATM by the roadside. "Target number 2 is withdrawing money. Keep an eye on target number 1 in the car. Target number 1 is not moving, over." "Brother Liang, I will go from the side to take a few pictures. You keep an eye on the back, over." Got it, over. Only the sound of the SLR's shutter could be heard in the car. Not long after, the Camry started up and drove for a few kilometers before stopping in front of a shopping mall. Just like before, only Roddy got out of the car. He entered the 3 men outdoor, under the surveillance of the electronic viewfinder, and not long after, he came out with a bag of things. He looked very calm, obviously not noticing that he was being followed. The Camry drove and stopped, and after a while, it entered Chongping City. It stopped at the Wind Speed motorcycle shop, and went in to take some things out. At this time, the people following Roddy looked at each other, feeling that it was a little strange for Roddy to come to such a place. But then they saw Roddy return to the Camry with a black bag and a bucket of engine oil, and pour the engine oil into the car regardless of anything. When did the Camry burn engine oil? Brother 11-inch, who was driving, looked puzzled, but Aluo next to him pointed to the Camry and said, "This car is a model from 7 or 8 years ago, so it's normal to have some problems. Didn't we investigate it? He hasn't driven it much these years, so it might have some problems after a long time." Hearing this, the people in the car no longer doubted. But they didn't pay attention to the scene of Roddy and the car shop owner talking while pointing to a motorcycle, thinking that he was just chatting. The walkie-talkie prompted the rotation, and the Passat went around the street next to them. Gongqing, who was taking pictures, glanced at the camera screen and whispered, "That woman is quite calm sitting in the car. I have to say, she is even more beautiful than the people in the movies." So what if she is beautiful? Those celebrities with bodyguards are still played by the big bosses. Sometimes, this kind of powerless people who are beautiful will attract disaster, understand? Li Nan said this. The expression on his face was quite unfriendly. Obviously, the resentment from being knocked out by Roddy was still stuck in his throat, making him very unhappy. It was already noon, and people in this line of work were used to eating in the car, so they took out some dry food and ate it with mineral water. Listening to the noise from the walkie-talkie, Roddy should have gone to a small store to buy a bag of food, and then returned to the car to eat. This guy has learned to be smart. He knows that the woman is too eye-catching, so he didn't take her out to eat. But why didn't he buy something better? He just came out to eat ham sausage instant noodles? Brother 11-inch, who was smoking through the sunroof, was still complaining. Aluo next to him said, "Isn't this guy a damn otaku? I guess he thinks instant noodles are the most delicious thing in the world, right?" Ha 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 ha. Everyone in the car laughed, and the atmosphere was obviously very relaxed. Until now, Roddy did not show any abnormalities. Until he parked the car in front of the Chongping District Hunter's cabin, people gradually felt that something was wrong. What is this place? Isn't it written here? Recurve bow, compound bow, archery equipment monopoly. Oh, I guess he wants to buy a bow for that woman? You saw the video yesterday, right? That woman is very good at archery. Then why did he come here to buy a bow? When this question was asked, people in the car looked at each other, obviously not understanding the reason. At this time, in the house, Roddy was choosing a bow under the introduction of the waiter. What's the largest hunting bow in terms of weight? I want it in stock. You want the largest? We have Hoyt Bison 3 detachable bow pieces, available in stock, 60 pounds. Roddy frowned slightly. 60 pounds sounded like the maximum weight of a hunting bow, but in fact, its power was not that great. He showed dissatisfaction and continued to ask, "Don't you have a bigger one?" "Young man, don't be greedy for a bigger weight. Practice your aim first." The boss next to him noticed his expression and kindly reminded him. Roddy shook his head. 60 pounds is still not enough. You are the largest bow equipment store in the capital, right? Don't you have more than 80 pounds? Yes, there is a Ming Dynasty imitation bow, 27 inches, 95 pounds. There was a young man like you who insisted on a larger weight bow. As a result, he customized this bow and used it for a week and returned it. If you think you can do it, I will give you a cheaper price. After all, the boss was a businessman. Although his words were provocative, who didn't want to clear out this trump card as soon as possible? Roddy didn't mind. After the waiter next to him brought the small bow, he weighed it. There was a non-standard 15-meter hole in the store. Without saying a word, Roddy put on leather gloves, buckled his thumb ring, picked up the matching traditional wooden arrow, and shot 3 times. This was not an American hunting bow with a bow window like the Desert Fox, but a real China traditional bow. The arrow was shot from the hand. But at the level of Roddy, there was basically no difference. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.